We're about to reconvene since we've recessed the last two meetings of the Taxation, Finance, and Economic Development Committee. Today is a work session, which is a little different than a normal hearing, and I'll explain what that means in just a moment. I'm Carl Stokes. I'm chair of the committee. To my immediate left is Councilman Eric Costello of the 11th Council District. Two away from him is Council President Jack Young. To his left is Council Member Ed Reisinger, 10th District, and a member of this committee. To his left is Councilwoman Mary Pat Clark, 14th District. And to my immediate right is Jennifer Coates, staff to the committee. To the right of the president is Kara Kunst, who is staff to the president, and there are several other representatives of both the administration as well as city council staff who are with us this evening. So we're gonna get right into it. So tonight, and by the way, let me just say at the top of this, that we're going to have two more similar sessions next week. I did announce yesterday at the council meeting, Wednesday at 4. I am retracting that and making it Tuesday at 4 for next week, and then one more before Memorial Day. And then after that third meeting, we should be considering the committee language that we would possibly amend the bill or work with a comprehensive community benefits agreement that will be a part of the legislation going forward. And so there is a desire that coming out of Labor Day that we're moving toward bringing something before the full council. And so tonight we're going to talk about 4 or 5 items that have come up in the course of the first two hearings. And next week we'll talk similarly about 4 or 5 items, and maybe there won't be a need for a third, but if there is, we will have a third, and we will again be putting down language that would that the committee would feel most comfortable about in terms of going forward. And tonight, particularly, we're going to talk about workforce hiring and workforce development, education funding, about the fiscal and performance accountability. We will, for the record, bring into affordable housing and profit sharing next Tuesday at that session. When we get to a particular subject, I'm going to ask the advocates for a particular subject to come forward and sit at that table and have a conversation with the council people, as well as the developers will be sitting at this table, and we can have a conversation among all of us about where we're going and how we want to move this forward. Before I go to the subject matters that I just talked about, I'm going to turn over to committee member and councilperson Ed Reisinger. Council Reisinger is going to offer an amendment not to be considered tonight, but to have a discussion about this evening and to talk about it. We also will be asking law, the city solicitor's office, to also come to the table and bring obviously their opinion and legal minds to this, to the extent that they're comfortable doing that. All right? So Councilman Reisinger, do you want to begin?
Yes, Mr. Chair. I just want to start that I am offering this amendment from the Labor's Union on consideration of the major master project labor agreement.
Okay.
And so I don't know whether each of you, does all the committee members have a copy of this?
I don't know if any of us have a copy.
Luna,
We were
copies?
emailed copies, but I don't know if any of us actually brought the copies with us.
Yes. It's consideration on their part, Mr. Chair and members of the council. But what I'm hearing is that this amendment from the law department is illegal, but I want to hear a response, a report from the labor department on this.
Sure.
If it's what I'm trying to say, I'm jumping the gun. If it's illegal to do a amendment, okay, on a PLA, then what I'm looking at is for the developer to do an MOU in regards to the contractors.
Okay, Councilman. So why don't we ask the initiators of the PLA, which you are sending an amendment to the committee on their behalf, if they would come to this table and speak to us a little bit about exactly what, a short primer of what the PLA does say.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sure.
Turn it on.
I think it's on the side. There you are.
Is it better? So my name is Rick Benetti. I represent the laborers union here, LIUNA, and with me is Alex Sanchez with the Mid-Atlantic region. And basically, we're offering up an amendment to legislate a PLA into the TIF legislation, which basically calls for standards with regard to local hiring, benefits, wages, and apprenticeship certifications. In a nutshell, we think this is the best way to put local Baltimore citizens to work, and we think it fits very nicely into the workforce development plan that Joyce is working on, we think it's, like I said, the best way to put local Baltimore citizens to work.
Again, my name is Alex Sanchez, part of the General Counsel for the Laborers Union, Laborers International. And our understanding is, as yours, that somehow there is a rumor that this may be illegal, and we can find absolutely no evidence that this would be illegal. Our case law, specifically Hotel Employees 57 versus Sage Hospitality, is directly on point, exactly material the same circumstances where a city had an interest in providing a labor neutrality agreement, labor peace agreement, PLA, whatever you want to call it, it's all the same to ensure prevailing wage for the labor that's done on the project, and whether it's through the city or through a bond issuing entity, either way, the city does have a material interest and is allowed and completely legal to put a project labor agreement into a TIF.
All right, thank you. Can you, Alex and Rick, could you explain to us exactly what I heard you broadly, but can you be more specific in terms of just what is a PLA and what is this one asking?
Understanding that insisting that prevailing wage apply to a city project is exactly what applies in this case. Prevailing wage is the law so that a large entity like the federal government cannot come in and undercut the wages that are traditionally paid to your employees, to your labor. So when you have an entity that is as large as the federal government, equal to what Sagamore or Under Armour is trying to put on one of the largest TIFs in the history of the United States, certainly it applies that they should not be able to come in and undercut what is the prevailing wage for that given area. And to do that, you put a, whatever you want to call it, a project labor agreement, a labor peace agreement, labor neutrality agreement, it has a number of names, but essentially says that you're going to pay the prevailing wage to labor for an organization that is recognized under the National Labor Relations Act. And in return, that organization agrees that it will not strike, will not slow up the project, will not affect the budget, and absolutely agrees that you will have labor neutrality on that project so that you finish on time and on budget and you have a guarantee as such.
Okay, and this would affect all workers, union or non-union?
Correct. This does not favor a union contractor or a union subcontractor. This only ensures that the labor wages will prevail what has traditionally been the wage as determined for that given area.
Okay. Before I go any further, Ms. Rulli, would you speak to the matter, please? Ms. Rulli is, she'll
Sure.
tell you. Go ahead.
Hillary Rulli on behalf of the City Solicitor's Office. I looked at the letter from Iuna and the case they cite, and they're absolutely right. If we were the bond issuer, we would be falling in that vein. The case they cite's out of Pittsburgh, and the Third Circuit absolutely said they are enough of a proprietor to do the specific things they wanted to do in Pittsburgh by law. But if you're not a proprietor, the federal labor law comes in and it preempts you from making a law. So a lot of the same topics could be addressed in agreements, but federal law means the governments can't make a law about them unless they are considered the proprietor. And in this instance, because the city is not issuing the TIF debt, we don't fall under the Third Circuit case. And while they had a separate sort of entity in Pittsburgh that was quasi-governmental, it's not the same as the state laws that govern our Medco. So we're not in the same situation. Now, with respect to prevailing wage, it's slightly different analysis here. If prevailing wage is encompassed in these labor terms, it's a slightly different analysis than what would have happened there. But before I get to prevailing wage, I'll say this finally about labor. Even if we agree somehow that we are enough of a proprietor to overcome the federal preemption, it doesn't allow you carte blanche to do everything by law. It still requires you to check that against two different sections in the National Labor Relations Act. And so while in general, the kinds of things they're talking about might be permissible if we were a proprietor, I would have to check each one of these 9 things against the case law to see whether that would work. With respect to prevailing wage, we are in a different situation entirely. In the 1930s, the city attempted to create a prevailing wage law and mandate that people who are using direct city money pay a prevailing wage. And the highest court in Maryland said, you can only do that with state authorization. Again, every state's different. Every state issues to its cities a separate set of laws that govern what that city may do. And the long story is, the city is governed by Article 2 of its charter, that's state law, and the state law says who we can pay prevailing wage to. So absolutely the state could change that and allow prevailing wage to apply for TIF projects. That's happened other places across the country, but that's a state law that would have to change before our city law could change. So to the extent that prevailing wage is part of a PLA, that for a separate reason wouldn't work here.
Okay. Thank you. We've been
No
joined
problem.
by Councilman William Bill Henry, 4th District, Vice Chair of the committee, and he's ready to ask a question. Oh, yes, of course.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon. I guess, and I don't know if this is a question for law or if this is a question for finance, but where in the bill does it say that Medco is issuing the bonds? Okay.
Yeah, so for example, Medco's defined in 670 as issuing the bonds, so they're defined in there, and then I can find specific references to the to a state government issuer. Okay. So they're sort of smattered throughout.
Okay. Oh, sorry.
So basically, if the terms of the financing deal were to change in any way, we would have to basically rewrite these bills because they are the city's authorizing this particular setup where we use our tax increment to pay Medco to issue bonds. So if that changes, we would wholesale rewrite. And in addition, we'd have to make sure that if the city were to do any or part of the infrastructure work, Medco would have to agree that they would be willing to issue bonds in that instance. Because without an agreement that bonds would be issued, we don't have anything to sign to approve that deal. We wouldn't approve TIFs generally, that's in Article 2. We're supposed to approve by Article 2 a specific deal, for lack of a better word. So that's what's before you, it's this specific deal. So we wouldn't be sort of, without a bond issuer, there isn't a specific deal to approve.
Okay, so
Does that make sense?
yes. So what I'm still trying to get a sense of is there something legally preventing us from saying that we want to do the work ourselves? So we want Medco to issue the bonds, and everything else about the deal would stay the same financially and legally. The difference is that we would contract out the work.
And let me be clear, if Medco doesn't agree to that, there isn't anything for me to legally approve. You'd have to have a bond issuer agree to that.
Okay.
Because then there wouldn't be any terms to agree. Because this is not just general legislation for bonds in general, because that's already contained in our Article 2. This is about this specific deal.
But I'm asking in terms of legal process, if we changed the legislation so that it said we are going to do the work, and we passed that, then it would be on Medco whether or not it wanted to do the deal.
I think that puts the cart before the horse. We couldn't approve a bill that had no deal. There isn't something to approve if there isn't someone to issue the bonds. So you would go to Medco first, I would think, and make sure they'd be willing to issue sufficient bonds if the developer is no longer on the hook for the development, and instead the city wants to ask the state for money for the city to do its own work.
But why, I guess I'm unclear on why the developer isn't on the hook still. Because isn't the whole point that the infrastructure is for the project that the developer is building? So,
Right, and so the developer builds it along with its vertical infrastructure. If we did it, we would make contracts to build the roads, and then if they didn't build their buildings, we'd still be on the hook for all the roads.
But right now, the way it happens, if we give them the money and they build the roads, and then they don't build the buildings.
No, the money they get to build the roads is from the sale of the bonds.
Right.
The city's tax increment only goes to pay back Medco for issuing the bonds.
Right.
Right.
I'm saying that right now, if they build the roads and the infrastructure first, which they're supposed to, if they build the infrastructure first and then something goes wrong and they don't build the vertical infrastructure, the vertical development, they still are legally responsible for paying back
Right,
the bonds.
you have
or
a
easement.
developer's agreement with them.
Right.
If you cut them out of the TIF, then there is no agreement with them. If you want all the TIF money to be used to pay Medco and Medco to pay the city directly, then you don't have any privity of contract with the developer.
Okay, so maybe I have a philosophical lack of clarity on what the TIF is for, because I thought that the whole point was we're paying for the infrastructure that they need to make the deal work. It's not that, is the point of the TIF to just give them a chunk of cash?
No,
okay.
the TIF is the sale of the bonds. So here the state is taking on the debt and issuing the bonds. The tax increment that exists only when they build the vertical buildings does it come into a fund that allows us to pay back Medco for the bonds. So they at this point are on the hook, so to speak, for building everything. They go they use their own cash or get a bank loan, and then they are repaid from the sale of state bonds. The city money only goes to pay the debt service on the bonds. So the state would likely not be willing to issue debt if the city is going to be the developer, but you're certainly free to ask them.
But this, I'm not, I guess I'm still having trouble making this connection. We're not being the developer, essentially we would be the GC for the infrastructure.
Right, you would build the infrastructure.
We would build the infrastructure.
So you'd have contracts with, Streets Inc. or whatever, and they would build you a street.
Sure.
Right. And so if you breach that agreement, nothing else happens, the city is is liable for the cost of the street.
But we're building the street.
Whereas
like I said, we're not
right.
the developer, we're the GC for the developer. They want a street here because they're going to have a building right next to it. They say to the city, we need you, Baltimore City, to build us the street that this building is going to go next to. So why does it matter to the deal? Why would it matter legally who builds the street, the developer or the city?
Right, so if the city builds the street, it's going to contract with someone to build the street.
Right.
Right. And so if nothing else happens in the development for some reason, we still owe the people who built the street all the money. And if the development doesn't happen, there's no tax increment to pay for the bonds that paid us for the street.
Okay, so if in the way that it normally works, where we have the developer's agreement and the developer builds the street or the developer hires somebody to build the street, it gets built, they submit proof that they paid the contractor and Medco reimburses them out of bond sales. If they don't build the vertical, if they don't build the building for whatever reason,
Then they have the contract with the builder. They're liable to the builder, not us in your first scenario.
when you say the builder, you
Whoever
mean
built them the street.
but by the time they don't build the building, the street's already done.
Well, they take on the risk of building them together. If we do it, we would be on the hook for building streets that wouldn't necessarily time with their buildings. So, I mean, I have bond counsel here if this isn't making enough sense, or if the chair wants to hear from someone else.
I'm going to ask Mr. Alan K. Son, who is the bond counsel, to speak to this.
No, Councilman Henry, I understand your question very well, and I think with tax increment financings, what you're suggesting is a little bit unusual, and it has to do with allocations of risk. So you have three parties that are involved in these financings. You have the governmental entity, the developer, and ultimately the bondholder. And so the theory behind tax increment financing is to shift the burden of risk on the developer, challenge them to generate the tax increment, and challenge them to take on the contract responsibility for the public infrastructure. If there's a failure with the development to proceed, ultimately that risk is with the bondholders who invest. So, you know, in a normal situation, we wouldn't want the city to be contracting to do the public infrastructure in a tax increment financing. If the city intends to finance the public infrastructure, it would be better off just issuing general obligation bonds. If it wants to take on that risk, the contractual liability for the construction, it may as well go ahead and issue general obligation bonds, because it's a cheaper form of borrowing. But most governments have, you know, used this tool as a way of shifting the development risk, both the construction risk and the development risk, to other parties. So that's sort of the theory behind it. And then there are practical considerations as well. The construction generally is provided in connection with the vertical development, so we're looking to finance horizontal development. And you know, there are economies of scale in combining those two construction activities together, so that there's some efficiencies when it comes to cost. From a bondholder standpoint, they have to make sure that the vertical construction is in sync with the horizontal construction. And so, you know, in my experience, to try to match up, you know, sort of a government process for construction with a private process for the vertical construction would be very unusual and I think difficult to do. So I do understand the question, but these are some of the practical realities. You know, I do a lot of these deals throughout the country. I've never seen sort of a city procurement for a large segment of the public infrastructure. I'm not saying it's not possible. I think your question was, could it be done? And I think it could be done. Would the city be able, or Medco be able to actually issue the bonds? I would say that might be difficult, or there would be a premium and interest costs associated because of the uncertainty about how the city procurement process would work and how it would match up with the private development. So, you know, I understand the idea, but practically very difficult.
So okay, and that kind of is getting closer. What I'm looking for is I can think myself of some of the reasons why we wouldn't want to. And I understand the additional ones that have been given. It's more along the lines of, as we continue to struggle with the question of what is a fair cost for labor on these projects that are being paid for with public funds, I'm just trying to make sure that the committee is aware of all the tools in its toolbox for dealing with this issue. And so even if there are all these reasons why, I'm sorry, is this, okay, even if there are all these reasons why we might not want to, in terms of it may affect the interest rate on the bonds, we may have to find someone else to issue them other than Medco. I think it's important that the committee know whether or not this is something that we can even address, or do we need to just check this off as we can't deal with this way, so let's move on and look at something else.
And I would just say that if there was some other mechanism used, we would want to see that mechanism before we could approve it for form and legal sufficiency, because Article 2 of the Charter, state law for us, requires that we have a deal in place. And that's part of what these multi-page bills are. So to gut the terms of this deal out of this bill and just make a theoretical, we'd like to do it, without a bond issuer that's willing, would therefore not allow us to approve them for form and legal sufficiency. That's the answer.
And that there may be an important thing, and I guess a good thing that we're doing this as a part of a work session, for people to understand that there are aspects, many aspects of this deal that are locked down from a legislative perspective. We've been brought a deal, and there's only so much that we can do to alter the deal as law. There are things that third parties can do contractually between each other that would not get in the way, and that's what you were alluding to before.
Right. The National Labor Relations Law impacts your labor ability, but that doesn't impact private contracts. It only impacts a government from making a law, which this would be. Similar with prevailing wage. It might be perfectly possible in other places. Just so happens our Article 2 in our charter, state law, is where that change would have to take place, so you wouldn't be the legislative body to do that. So it doesn't mean those things can't happen. It does mean that those things could not happen by amending these bills. They can be done, contractually.
Councilman, let me just say clearly, without question, this amendment can be done. When you look at the case law that I'm referring to, it says specifically the city has a proprietary financial interest in the TIF development project that is the same as that of any nonprofit private entity that finances development by issuing bonds. So you can attach an amendment to this, and it will carry through to an entity like Medco issuing the bonds because of the interest the city has in getting this done correctly. So absolutely clear. I've heard no competing case law, no competing theory as to why it might not be as clear as this case. It can be done, and it is legal.
Hillary, does the city have case law on this?
Well, he's absolutely right. If we had the same interest as the proprietor, we don't. Medco does. So that's the difference, and bond counsel can tell you that. The facts are different here. It's not the law. We don't disagree on the law. It's the facts that are different. We don't stand in the place of a proprietor in this instance because we are not the government issuing the bonds. Medco is issuing the bonds. And the case he refers to is out of Pittsburgh, and the facts are just slightly different. And if you want bond counsel to address that, they certainly can.
Yes, we do. Let me just ask this. It's a little bit of a tangent, but not so much. So let's say we issue a substantial first, second phase of the TIFs, of the bonds, rather. God forbid, economic, whatever reason, the vertical doesn't move forward. The developer is not around anymore. Who's paying for the bonds?
The bonds are secured only by the incremental taxes that are generated at the development district at the property.
Right. And of course, I'm saying, what if there is no?
So that's essentially a bondholder risk. You know, there is no full faith and credit. There's no other obligation of the city to provide additional tax increment revenues. There would be no obligation on the state issuer to supply funds. It is a bondholder risk, and that's why, you know, I think we work so hard to structure these deals in the best possible way. Councilman Stokes, if I could say something about the amendments, some of the amendments that I've seen proposed.
You say some, are you talking about this specific
Well,
one? Or-
I've read this one, and
Okay. Are there others
Yeah, this
that
particular.
you wish to
We'll use
speak
this as
to?
an example. So let me talk about best practices. Like, you know, sometimes in Baltimore, I don't know what it is, but sometimes we think that maybe we don't do things as well as others all the time. But, you know, I do deals all over the country, and so through this process, this committee, Board of Finance, Board of Estimates, the Council, BDC, Baltimore City has one of the most intense and best processes for tax increment financing in the country. In fact, when people, you can laugh, but it does. People study what is done in Baltimore. It becomes a subject of seminars as people speak about the programs and the policies that the city has. So, it's a very good, intense program. It's far more involved than any other jurisdiction in Maryland, and maybe with the exception of one or two places in the country, one of the best processes throughout the United States. And that's what this committee goes through, all the other committees. So what we try to do as bond counsel is to make sure we're using best practices at all times. And so when it comes to the legislation, we assist with the legislation. We work with Ms. Ruley and others. The best practices of legislation in this area is to make it follow the authorizing charter provisions that approve the issuance of the bonds, the pledge of the TIF revenues. So we look at Section 2, Article 2, Section 62, Section 62A. If you review this legislation, it follows those to a T. And we would suggest that all of these other things are worthy matters. They're very important. And, Councilman Stokes, we've had these discussions. They need to be dealt with in ways outside of the legislation. If by amending the legislation, we're putting the validity of the bonds at risk in some way, or that somehow a breach could cause a default under the bonds, that is not the best practices. And
We agree with that language. We absolutely agree with that language. Appreciate that. Let me, Ms. Rowley.
I would just say, there have been cases in the past where, we can agree to disagree, Launa and I, but even if we're considered a market participant and the fact that Medco's issuing the bonds and not us doesn't matter to a court, again, it still doesn't give us carte blanche. And so, for example, in Illinois and again in the Third Circuit, there are cases that say, yep, government, you're a market participant here. Your money makes you a market participant. But your legislation can't be about labor practice. It has to be directed to making the particular deal at issue effective and cost effective. So if the things contained in some of these amendments in this particular case don't make it cost effective, don't make it about doing what's cost effective and least costly with our money, a court's likely going to say that strays into labor policy. And so we have to be careful there too. So even if we agree to disagree and we end up saying we're a market participant, that doesn't give us carte blanche. So I just want to, be clear on that.
Understood. Before we go further, without passing the mic back, Councilman Henry has asked a couple of questions, which I think Finance has spoken to before. Steve, you still awake? Yes, sir. Thanks. I'm joking, of course. So Councilman Henry asked, and maybe you can answer this, Mr. Quezon, why is Medco issuing the bonds instead of the city?
Good evening, Steve Kraus, Deputy Finance Director. We haven't specifically selected Medco, but they are certainly a state candidate. And the reason we selected them is because of the size of this transaction at about $660 million in total. The way that we have structured it will enable us to keep this debt off the city's profile and financial statements. So that's why we've elected to go that route.
Yeah, I'm sorry, the follow-up question, and I say this because a lot of what we end up having to do is we then go out to other meetings and we have to explain these, maybe, no, oh, okay, so what we've been told many times about TIF bonds as opposed to general obligation bonds is that the city's full faith and credit is not involved. That if if everything goes right, the developments, the increment of taxes pays back the bondholders, everything's wonderful. If anything goes wrong, the developer is on the hook. Given that there is no way that the city should have to end up paying these bonds back, right? Given that, why would it matter how big of a set of bonds we issue? Why would it affect the city's credit profile in any way if we're never going to be on the hook for paying them back?
I mean, bondholders are not going to just go out and buy bonds because without checking the credit and understanding the underwriting of these deals. Just because you issue a bond and say, here, take this, those institutional investors that buy these types of transactions are going to look at the credit, they're going to look at how it's being underwritten and ensure that their revenues are adequate to repay their debt. And so they're not just taking the debt and not looking at it as far as researching the details. They're going to look at that, research, and see that the increment has got to be adequate. They're going to look at the special tax provisions to make sure that they're going to get repaid.
But why would it, but that doesn't really answer why would it matter that it's, I mean, we have already we have $125 million TIF out for Harbor Point right now and a whole bunch of little ones. So is there some kind of top limit to how much TIF, how much tax increment financing we can do? Because if there is, that number was never given to us in any previous TIF hearing. And no one ever said that we can only do this because we don't want to come up against our TIF ceiling. Like, we've never talked about having a TIF ceiling. So is that just because it was so far above where we were that we had not bothered and now this will bring us there?
That's correct.
Okay, so if that's the case, then let's talk about it. Like, why is there a TIF ceiling at all? Because if there's no way that the city is ever going to be on the hook for this money, then why would it have any impact on our credit rating? I can imagine why lots of other financial decisions that we make can impact our credit rating. Why would this impact our credit rating if we're never liable for the money?
I can just say a credit rating is different than full faith and credit. Full faith and credit means the taxes for the entire city go to back the bonds. That's not the case here. This is only the tax increment. So that's what full faith and credit means. You know, those kinds of bonds are general bond, obligation bonds, and they're put on the ballot for all the people to vote on. This is not the full faith and credit. That does not mean that it can't impact our credit rating.
But why? And that's what I'm trying to say. If I'm not saying you're lying, I'm saying why is it impacting our credit rating if there's never going to be any reason for us to pay back the money? Why would that matter?
I guess I'm not sure I'm understanding your question. I mean, the amount of TIF that is being issued is directly related to the amount of work that's required and the increment that's being generated to support it. So that's the tie-in with how much we're issuing.
But no, I guess what I'm confused about is that I can see why bondholders or potential bondholders would care about the credit rating of the developer, because they're the ones who are going to have to pay the bonds back if the tax increment isn't enough.
The answer lies with the credit rating agencies. I think you would have to ask them why this kind of thing matters to them.
Yeah, let me take a shot, Councilman. Let me try. So,
Here.
the idea of
Tag team.
the idea of using a state issuer, a Medco, that idea is to have this be the debt of someone else, right? If the Medco bonds, it is Medco's debt as opposed to the city debt, and that's a good thing. Rating agencies do take into account the amount of TIF debt that a jurisdiction has issued, and there are some guidelines and some criteria for when they worry about too much debt being issued, i.e. TIF revenues being diverted to specific debt service versus it being available to the general fund. So, I mean, I think the idea is it's better to have it be someone else's debt, but because we are pledging city revenues, that does factor in, because there are revenues that are being diverted from somewhere else, from the revenue from the general fund. So that is a factor that is taken into account. But I believe the financial advisors believe that we're better off from an accounting standpoint for it to be not treated as city debt, even though we take some level of hit, if you will, with regard to the tax increment revenues being diverted.
I don't want to take up time with this, but still, I'd like to follow up with that.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Before we ask for a response from the developer, Councilwoman Clark.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I'm not a member of the committee, so I'm kind of coming in at a basic level. And here's my question to the committee, if you would let the applicants explain. It's important for me to understand forget about the law department for a moment, the bond counsel, that stuff. We're talking about one of the biggest construction projects in the history of the city of Baltimore. And you're talking about prevailing wage, and you're talking about a project, it's a PLA. Now, what does that look like that is an improvement over not having what you're asking for in terms of earning power, city workers, who's allowed to be part of it as a worker? What is it? Can you just say what this is so we know why you want it?
A PLA is an agreement that's reached so that there are living wages and family-sustaining wages and health care and retirement paid to the people that are employed to build the project. That's it. That's the fundamental benefit of what a PLA does, because if you look at people who bid on the contract, bricks cost the same, asphalt costs the same, pipes cost the same. The only place that you can improve your bid is to lower the wages that you pay the people that are doing the labor on the job. And that's a race to the bottom to pay people as little as possible, and a PLA prevents that.
Thank you. Madam.
I mean, I'm gonna not spend the whole night here, but okay, so you've said a couple things, living wages, benefits, but what happens? I mean, what's different from what it is without this? So everybody comes together and does what? Makes an agreement? No, I mean, they're not gonna let me ask too many questions here because I'm not a member of the committee. What does it feel like, look like? Who's in it? Who's not in it? What does it mean to the project? Does it cost more money? And that is not a question of legal sufficiency, whether it does or not. I mean, what's the effect on people? What's the effect on the project developed?
You are asking all the exactly right questions. What happens is it is a recognition of collective bargaining so that you have folks that are qualified, that are trained, that are able to complete the project without being injured, without being killed on the job. They are recruited locally, and they are minority inclusive. And if you don't have that, then you have contractors who come in and bring anybody from out of state. We call them trunk slammers. They come in, just work the project at the minimum possible wage that they can bid, and then they get out of town. And you don't have anyone trained up, you don't have minority participation, and you don't have local hiring.
Yeah, like we
One,
said.
one more follow-up, please,
like we
and then
said
I would
earlier.
like to move to...
Like we said earlier, it sets up standards across the board for local hiring, wage and benefits, and basically workers' rights and protections on the job site. It allows all contractors to bid competitively across the board, union or non-union, across the board, and it sets a wage level that construction workers, no matter what their trade is, are able to raise a family in a way that keeps them here in Baltimore, keeps them paying taxes, sends their kids to schools, and helps build the local economy. And what the PLA does that other agreements don't is it creates an ironclad it creates an ironclad agreement between the contractors and the workers that cannot be broken because the union will watch and make sure that those workers get the protections that's built into this agreement. I mean, you can put these wonderful, these pieces of a PLA into a wonderful MOU, but who's going to enforce it? That's our question.
And so what about if you're a non-union contractor, you're coming in and you want to be part of this thing, can you do it?
Yes.
What, do you have prevailing wage going on then with the different trades?
It sets the standard for wages so everybody gets paid the same. Everybody gets paid the same. So any contractor coming in, if they're paying their workers fair wages and they don't want to cheat it and they don't want to get around the protections that are set up in this sort of an agreement, then it shouldn't matter.
And does it include apprenticeships?
Thank you. Let me move on. I think we got it. We understand the concept.
Yes, it does.
We
It guarantees
understand.
a certain amount of
Thank you.
apprenticeships
Thank you.
through our through
All
our.
right. Let me ask the developers to respond.
Mr. Chairman, John Laria from Ballard Spar representing Sagamore. I just want to start with this overarching comment, then I'll turn over to Caroline Paff. It's a little otherworldly to sit here and listen to the elected officials of the city government talk about why the city should take on more debt. The whole idea of this structure is that the debt is taken on by Medco. It doesn't affect the city's bond rating. It's a public-private partnership. It shifts the risk of delivery. It shifts the risk of cost overruns to the private party, to us, and away from the city. I thought that's what people were trying to do. I thought that was a good idea. And somehow there's this notion that it's a bad idea. And if the only reason, it's the only reason I can think of that you want to do that, is to deal with the question of wages, I would submit to you, first of all, that's the tail wagging the dog, because there are larger interests at play here. Moreover, and I'll turn this over to Caroline Paff, because of the acknowledgement of the wage issues, because of the relationship that Sagamore is trying to develop with the unions, Sagamore has been actively involved in trying to work out wage deals with the unions so that, frankly, we could have our cake, not we, but the city, could have its cake and eat it too, meaning that the project would be done by the private sector, the risk would be shifted to the private sector, the bond debt would not be on the city's books, all good things, and the question is, what about the wages? We are not ignoring that. And so Sagamore from the beginning has been involved and engaged, and I'll let Caroline describe the many things that have been done to try and do both of those things. But I would submit to you that having this structure is extremely beneficial to the taxpayers of Baltimore. The question is, what can you do at the same time to address the issue of wages and prevailing wages, something that frankly Sagamore supports, and I'll let Caroline explain what we've been doing.
Thank you. Caroline Paff, Vice President with Sagamore Development. We've met with representatives from LiUNA a number of times, and I think we've had some very productive discussions. I was certainly able to understand more their concerns, and we kind of enumerated them in a memorandum that circulated to some folks earlier in the week. But we agree that Baltimore City residents should be making good wages and be paid for benefits. Their benefit package they can elect or not elect, but we do believe that that is the case. And we discussed this with LiUNA. And in fact, we offered that we would do a minimum wage on the project for all of the trades that was equal to LiUNA's minimum scale wage, which is wage plus benefits, paying both, which is about 37 cents higher than prevailing wages. We agreed to do that. And they said the question on the whole thing, and I said, well, if you give me 100% Baltimore City employees, then 100%. But we don't just want to pay more so that that money is exported to folks who live in other counties. We want it here in Baltimore City. So that is, in fact, what we offered. Now, so that's what we said for the laborers. We would give prevailing wage on their entire jurisdiction. We would set a minimum scale for the trades, all of the trades, which in fact was more than LiUNA pays its apprentices, and we agreed that if LiUNA insisted that we lower the amount that we were willing to pay in order to induce apprentices to complete their programs, we would work with them on that. But let's be clear, we actually offered everything that they're saying that they wanted: the inducement for Baltimore City workers on the project, a fair minimum scale, prevailing wages for the laborer's entire jurisdiction. We agreed that this would not just be the labor wages, but also I think the benefits right now are about $5.93 an hour. We agreed to pay that too. And we, as folks know who have attended the other hearings, we have an agreement with the Comptroller's Office to monitor the agreements and the compliance. So we put all of those things out there. We also said, along with the audit, we would give them a meeting every month where they had a look ahead on upcoming contracts so that they know what to prepare their pipeline for, as well as a debrief on contracts that their subs were not awarded so that they understood what the difference was and how it could be improved so that they were more competitive the next time around. Further, we suggested that a percentage of, and we would work on what this number is, a percentage of the worker hours on site would be dedicated to the apprenticeship programs, and we asked LiUNA to participate in our workforce development program so that along with all of the other job training programs that are out there for folks, the laborers, opportunities with the laborers would be presented. Now, the laborers are unique in that as a percentage, they have a much higher percentage of members who are Baltimore City residents. So we truly believe that our interests most closely align with LiUNA as far as getting the workforce in. But not everybody wants to go into the construction industry. And so our workforce development program has to be much larger than just state apprenticeship programs. But all of those things are certainly up for discussion. As recently as today, I said, hey, do you want, we were expecting some kind of answer or return on our previous proposal. And, there were some email issues maybe, but as of 4 o'clock, I hadn't gotten any kind of response. But we prepared a letter agreement that we can sit down and work with LiUNA on, and we want actually to do that. But let me address that whether or not it costs more or if it doesn't. So we had one of our pre-construction firms go back and look at the cost between prevailing wage jobs and all private non-prevailing wage jobs. And there is usually a difference between 2.7 and 7%, most average about a 4% cost difference. Now, we believe that if this extra percentage is actually going to Baltimore City residents, then we want to be in that deal. That's a deal we want. But we're not just going to carte blanche agree to pay more so that folks from other places can come in and do that. So folks who want to work with us and get Baltimore City back to work, that's terrific. We are open to that. I don't know how many more times I can email and ask, but I will continue to ask. I actually like both of the gentlemen sitting across the table from me, and I think that we can, close the gap on this agreement. But I want to be clear that we actually did, in fact, make those offers.
Mr. Chair?
Thank you. Before, okay. Ms. Rowley.
I would just like to point out that whatever terms are reached in an MOU is binding on the parties because they reached them privately. The exact same terms put into legislation suffer from 3 problems. A court could invalidate them. For example, the kinds of apprenticeship training and wage scales that were just discussed were invalidated as part of a legislation that happened in the Third Circuit in 2011. That is the case of Tri-M versus Sharp. So what you can agree to privately is far bigger. Secondly, you have bond investors who may not like the terms of the particular legislation, and it could make the bonds less marketable. And third, you have the fact that a future council could change things legally. So none of that pertains to private agreements. So I just want to be clear that those legal impediments come up when something's put into a law that don't exist in a private agreement.
Let me go backwards. First of all, if it's put into the law, wouldn't they have to, a future council, I'm going to come to you, Councilman Costello, actually, wouldn't they have to break the whole law out? Would they have to repeal the entire package?
Not necessarily. They could do any sort of things. This legislature cannot bind a future legislature, but 2 private parties agreeing in an MOU is binding based on whatever the terms of that MOU or contract or whatever are.
I missed something. I'm sorry. You say this cannot bind the
I'm
future?
saying that when you put any of these things in a law, it suffers from 3 things that a private contract doesn't. The fact that a court could review it, the fact that it may impact the marketability of the particular bonds, and the fact that a future legislature could change it because it's part of a law. Whereas if it's in a contract, it doesn't suffer from those things. So the thought that it's better to put in a law, you have to understand, you suffer from those potential problems with a law that you do not suffer with on a binding contract.
Okay, but the city, the mayor and city council can be a party to this MOU binding agreement, can it not?
Yeah, I believe
sign.
There are binding agreements. Right. What we can do as a contracting party goes far beyond what we can do legislatively.
I'm with you. Okay. Yes.
I just want to clarify one thing. Our issue here today is not with the other side of the table or with Port Covington, because we'll continue to work with them and try and work out an agreement. What we're here for today is to talk to City Council about putting it in the law. If you believe that they should pay the correct wage for the correct work that is determined by the prevailing wage, put it in the law so we can make sure that it happens.
I got you. And I think, if I could speak for my esteemed colleague from the 10th District, I think he would rather, maybe this is a bit of a hammer or not, that he would rather the sides sit down and work it out and avoid,
we continue to try.
And avoid it having to be here. And again, he wants to speak for himself.
I can speak for myself, Mr. Chair. Thank you. But what you said, just to echo your sentiments, that's what I'm looking at. I mean, we're sitting here, it's a good project, it's going to help the city of Baltimore, and I think they have to sit down, Sagamore and the union, and try to work out a win-win situation. I don't want to see bus loads of people coming from another subdivision coming into the city of Baltimore when we have a high unemployment rate. So we're spending a lot of time on this, and I just wanted to come out to be a win-win situation for the citizens of Baltimore. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank everybody. We appreciate this segment of this evening, and we want to move on to the next segment. Thank you, Councilman, for bringing this to our attention and letting it roll. Ms. Rowley, you probably shouldn't go too far. All right. Let's talk about hiring goals or mandates and workforce development. Again, the developer will sit where you are, and who's going to represent the advocates for this particular? We have water today. Yeah, thanks. You have a mic? You have a mic? Okay. Give them, thank you. All right. So please introduce yourselves and let's begin.
Good evening, Councilman Stokes. Thank you for this opportunity today. I'll start by introducing myself, and I'll kind of help coach the panel as far as any questions or what we plan on bringing up for consideration. But first, my name is Jim Williams. I'm here as a member of the Build Up Baltimore Coalition. I'm also a member of the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades, a construction union, so it was interesting sitting in the back of the room there while some of that conversation was taking place. I wanted to state for the record that our union was founded in 1887. Founded right here in Baltimore, Maryland. Founded as one of the oldest and proudest unions in the AFL-CIO, and we're proud to call Baltimore our birthplace. Together, we join with members of our coalition. We have with us Alex Campbell from 32BJ of SEIU, representing the service sector. We have with us Mark Coles, the Executive Director of Choice, which represents the 17 affiliates of the construction industry. We have also with us Roxy Erbekian, who is the Business Manager for Unite here in the city. We also have with us Rob English from Build, and we thank Build for being a part of this discussion. And we have with us Melvin Wilson from Turnaround Tuesday, one of the premier providers of workforce development. So we thank you for giving us the opportunity to talk about the real issue, and it's workforce development. A lot of the back and forth discussion that just took place publicly can be happening in a room where the parties can be sitting down, reaching agreement. But at its core, workforce development in TIFs is where the city needs to receive the benefit. And as stated earlier by the attorney from Ballard Spahr, this is a public-private partnership. It's obvious by what we just witnessed and what we just listened. And the public good has to be taken into account as well. The members of Build Up Baltimore in coalition with Build and Bridge Maryland have offered up solutions that we feel can meet the needs for workforce development. We'll talk about those solutions, and hopefully we can have questions and answers, and we're willing to talk in front of the audience as well. We've broken out our workforce development plan, or our workforce development initiative, by both the construction jobs and the service sector jobs that will follow. These jobs will not be here tomorrow, but they will be here as you deliberate this TIF. So it's important. Council members, I'm here to emphasize that had Sagamore announced this development as a completely private venture, there would be no issue. If that were the case, I would say let the free market reign. Absolutely. If you want to let the free market reign, let it reign. But it's not. It's a public-private partnership, and the City Council has to do its due diligence in deliberating this. We appreciate Council President Stokes.
No. I'm
Council Chair Stokes. Council President Young, my sincere apologies.
Committee chair. Don't get me fired before
I'm
December
sorry.
6th, please.
Only your residents can fire you. Good urban development and workforce development need to be talked about hand in hand, not separate. We're talking about the largest project on the East Coast, the largest urban redevelopment project. Workforce development has to have a place at the table. We would love to hear Sagamore's plan for workforce development. Through this whole process, we've yet to hear it. We've been working with partners in the community and talking about the real issues that exist, real access to training. We've walked away with a real hope that we can reach a mandate, not a goal, that 51% of all hours worked on the project are worked by Baltimore residents. Again, 51% of all hours worked by Baltimore residents. We come behind that with what we believe is a solution to making that mandate a reality. Workforce development isn't something that you can just say happens. There has to be a plan, and there has to be a plan executed. We believe strongly that philanthropic work is great work, and we applaud Sagamore and we applaud Under Armour for their work in the community, but workforce development is not philanthropic. Workforce development is hard work. Workforce development takes a plan and a vision, and we believe that the amendment that we are offering up can provide the city with a vision for workforce development. And we hope that you consider it seriously and ask questions, and hopefully we can reach a good understanding of it. With that, I would like to turn it over to one of the members of my...
Okay, before you move forward, I'm going to ask the council president for some comments. Let me ask you, you mentioned the word amendment. Do you have an amendment that you wish this committee to consider? What I'd like to avoid is to redo the hearings we've already had. I'd like to really move toward the wording that you'd like us to be considering in the committee to go forward. I'm not dismissing the what you've set up to do and who to talk, etc. But again, respectfully, I don't want to redo the hearing, but I'd like to talk about if you have an amendment, if you have wording, if you have, you mentioned a mandate as opposed to a goal, and I just would like for you to move toward that. Before you do, though, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't think anybody probably was listening, but Sagamore been working with me and this council, and they said earlier about they want 100% Baltimore City workers from Baltimore City working on this project. They've been committed to working with me and this council to ensure that Baltimore City residents work on this project. They've been committed to apprenticeship programs, workforce development, inclusionary housing. They are on board. So if people would listen and understand that they are committed, I have them at the table working with the various organizations, and they are committed because they want to make sure that this project gets done. Will we get everything that we want? Absolutely not, because no one gets everything they want. Will we get something that will make all of us satisfied? Absolutely not. But will we get something that will make us happy? Yes, we will, because they are committed. No one gets 100% of everything they want, but we're going to get the best deal for Baltimore City, and I guarantee you that. This bill will not go anywhere unless we get what we need for Baltimore City. Sagamore knows that. We're committed to that, and I think we're going to get what we need. So let's not sit here and fool ourselves about we're going to get 100%, because we're not going to get 100%, but we're going to get what we need to move Baltimore forward. So I had to say that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. So to your question, Mr. Chairman, we have drafted language. We have drafted language that we share with just about every single member of the City Council, anybody that would be willing to sit down and talk. And we would love to maybe go through some of the specifics.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Now. So we did break down construction jobs separate from retail and service jobs because of the very nature of how those contracts are let and how the work is performed. Similar to the last panel, we said that there should be a community benefits addendum that is tied to the legislation, but also we are willing to work around framework for a community workforce development program, just, that's designed specifically for Port Covington, with these goals, that all construction jobs should include wage and benefit standards, including a requirement for contractors to pay prevailing wages, which we don't need to open that can of worms again. All apprentices should be and must be registered with the Maryland State Apprenticeship System, and part of apprenticeship programs that have proven successful track records in graduating construction apprentices to journey worker level. More importantly, all official city documents authorizing funding or other support for Port Covington must include a targeted hiring program with a goal of increasing low-income Baltimoreans' access to these certified apprenticeship programs. Access is important. Elements of the targeted hiring and program should include that 51% of all hours worked are worked by targeted residents, 20% of all hours worked performed by participants in a registered apprenticeship program, 25% of all hours worked performed by apprentices should be performed by workers with barriers to employment, such as being homeless, being a custodial single parent, receiving public assistance, having a criminal record, suffering from chronic unemployment, being emancipated from the foster care system, and out-of-work youth, and returning veterans. For every 20,000 hours worked performed by a prime contractor, that prime contractor or any of its subcontractors will sponsor and employ a targeted resident new apprentice for at least 1,000 hours of work performed on the project. For every 1,000 hours beyond the first 1,000 hours, that targeted resident begins work on the project as a new apprentice, the employing contractor will receive a credit of 500 additional hours towards its hiring requirements. Contractors neither asking about or independently researching a job applicant's criminal background unless otherwise required by state law or in good faith determine that that position is such sensitivity that a background check is required, and where a background check is required, only considering job-relevant convictions and only doing so after a conditional offer of employment is made. Very long language, I understand, but important. Mr. Chairman? Yes. It's very important that there's actual language behind these behind these goals and behind these mandates. We're offering up what we believe is a solution to the earlier conversation. We also think that there should be a bank, a jobs bank, that contractors working on site should pay 5 cents per worker hour into a fund to help advance low-income Baltimoreans' access to good jobs, including by paying for short-term transportation needs, tools, participation in pre-apprenticeship programs that meet high-quality standards, such as the use of the multi-core craft curriculum. And we believe, and this is pretty strong language and important, that the city, in partnership with contractors, unions, and apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship programs, should establish an apprenticeship readiness program. An apprenticeship readiness program that facilitates the entry of these targeted residents into high-quality pre-apprenticeship and apprenticeship programs. As part of this program, and to the extent permitted by law, Maryland registered apprenticeship programs should enter into agreements providing for the direct entry of pre-apprenticeship graduates into apprenticeship programs. There needs to be a pipeline that's developed in this city to allow people to have real access to these jobs. The City of Baltimore, Sagamore, and construction contractors will collaborate to fund express bus service from Baltimore's targeted neighborhoods to the site where construction is ongoing. We believe that that language that we just read would provide the real means to the discussion that happened before we took the table. A real means for the city and Sagamore to enter into an arrangement that allows for pathways into good jobs, jobs that have real value. With that, I'm going to talk, if it's okay, if I may, pass the microphone over to my brother from Turnaround Tuesday to talk a little bit more about targeted residents. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Council, my name is Melvin Wilson. I am the Executive Director of Turnaround Tuesday, which is a jobs movement of BUILD. Our target residents are people who live in Baltimore's lower income neighborhoods and who are either or underemployed or have a history of difficulties accessing opportunities. This is a moment in time to set up a system that will put people back to work. Anything absent of a 51% mandate or anything absent of accountability to this mandate will reassure that there are two Baltimores. There are hundreds of workforce development entities that work every day with thousands of residents of Baltimore City to prepare them with essential skills to go to work. These entities provide a pipeline to hard skills training, also to our trade union partners to provide the necessary workforce to complete this project. We believe that if Sagamore will tell you that there are not enough workforce in Baltimore to complete this project, that is not true. We have thousands of residents of Baltimore that are looking for work, and this would be a great opportunity with the 51% mandate.
Thank you. I'd also like to segue to talk about the retail jobs and the jobs that come down the road. And I'm going to turn it over to Roxy Erbikian from Unite Here, if I may.
Thank you. Good evening. I think it's this evening now. Thank you for the opportunity. To the folks at Sagamore, many of whom I've met with a few times, hello. There's been a lot of discussion about the construction jobs, which is very important, and the first phase. What we see in Unite Here, which we represent hotel workers, gaming workers, food service workers, is what happens after the construction's completed and the buildings are built and the businesses are in place and the employees are hired. And in Baltimore, I think we can all be very proud that there's been a real concerted effort and certain success in developing our convention and visitors business, our retail business, hotels, restaurants, and all the services that go along with it. I'm sure SEIU is going to talk about cleaners and the other services. And you know, when we think about development, it's very important to think about the buildings that are going to be built, but also what does that development mean in a particular part of the city to the rest of the city. And while this project is going to be focused at a particular geographic area, it's our hopes that Baltimore residents from all around the city will be working there. And the vehicle to bring this development to more of the city than just the particular TIF area is the jobs, because people are going to work in those jobs, they're going to take their paychecks home to their neighborhoods. And that's what we see in Unite Here as being so critical for economic development. What kind of jobs are they going to be? Are they going to be low-paying service jobs where people are working and working and working and still have to have two jobs, and so they can't bring that money home to the neighborhood? Or are they going to get good living wage jobs where they'll be able to pick up a paycheck, go to their neighborhoods, spend their money at the local businesses, send that extra $5 home to school with their kids for the school supplies and the field trips that they're going to pay for? And we would like to put forth, along with this coalition, an amendment, which we will give you language on, that states that all of the jobs in the TIF zone will pay no less than the Baltimore City living wage. This city has a really proud history of being the first city in the United States of America to establish living wage jobs, and in fact there's precedent for this. When the Hilton was built, when contracts are signed with different city buildings, the city requires that they pay city living wages. So in order to ensure that the jobs that exist once the construction's done, I think that the city has an opportunity to make sure that your vision of good wages in Baltimore are covered by this existing living wage law. So we look forward to working with you. We'll continue to meet with Sagamore if they want to meet. So far we have found that not to be extremely, really very fruitful, but we are very concerned about the service, hotel, and retail jobs once the project is built.
Thank you. Again, let me reiterate that the committee would like language as quickly as possible. As I mentioned, we're going to do 3 of these work sessions, and just speaking for the committee, it's a heck of a lot of work to try to do all the work in the last moments before we're ready to move this bill one way or the other. We also would like, and we're encouraging, of course, that as much as possible that the sides can work out an agreement that doesn't necessarily have to go into the legal language of the bill, but it could be an agreement, and the council and the mayor may sign off on as a signatory, and we can do that. So we're encouraging that first, frankly, before we want to consider it. But we need the language sooner rather than later.
So is my error, Mr. Chairman, it is in this all-comprehensive amendment that is going to be submitted, and as well as I'm assuming that there's a priority to hire city residents.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, we
really, in an effort to save time, did not read every single word from the document, but we believe that the end may be the most important, and that's the creation of a workforce development board that's codified in city law, that has real accountability and that has real oversight over workforce development, and that's made up of the real interested parties, those that represent all of Baltimore, to make sure that the goals of any community agreement or any community benefits agreement that's reached outside this room, or any language that this city council deems necessary to put into the language, that this board has real oversight and that has real accountability metrics. And that's a very important thing to consider as we go forward. But I'm going to ask my brother from 32BJ, Alex Campbell, to talk about the retail jobs outside of the hotel industry as well.
Thank you.
Hey, good evening, everyone. I'd like to echo everyone else's thanks for having us here to discuss this important issue. My name is Alex Campbell. I'm with SEIU Local 32BJ. My union represents more than 1,200 service employees here in Baltimore City, representing janitors and security guards, nearly all of whom live here in Baltimore City. They're Baltimore City residents. Over 97% of the folks who clean and protect our downtown buildings, places like Johns Hopkins, are Baltimore City residents. And I'd like to echo what my sister from Unite here was talking about, where we're here to talk about the workers who are going to be working at Port Covington, indefinitely after it gets built. And these are restaurant workers, retail workers, janitors, and security guards. And these are jobs that are available often to low-income residents of Baltimore without extensive training, but all too often we find that they're minimum wage jobs. One effect of that, they're high turnover jobs, but this doesn't have to be the case. And we think that it's important that because of the public resources at stake in the deal, we think it's important that this site provide good jobs that can support working families in Baltimore City. And our part of the proposals that have been mentioned before kind of go into more details, and I'm happy to answer questions about the standards here. But I think the real priority here is that for all the jobs that absent language here could easily become minimum wage jobs with high turnover that workers don't feel invested in. We think that with a higher standard for these jobs, workers will stick around Port Covington. The benefits will flow to the neighborhoods all around Baltimore City, and the city can really get the best bang for the resources it's putting in here. So, thank you.
Thank you. Next. So one final piece is that accountability metrics and having real accountability and transparency to the process. We believe that all hiring should be should be verified through certified payrolls. Certified payrolls are a mechanism the city uses and the state uses to verify employment, to verify wages. Therefore, the community board that we seek to establish will have something to actually look at. So certified payrolls are often used in government contracting. We believe these records should be submitted to the Mayor's Office of Economic Development on a monthly basis. The Mayor and the City Council should establish a Community Advisory Committee to receive quarterly reports on Port Covington's progress towards meeting these mandates. The Community Advisory Committee should include representatives from the community, labor organizations, a representative from the contracting community, and should be staffed by the City of Baltimore. The Community Advisory Committee should be authorized to establish remedial action plans for employers that are failing to meet the mandates. The Community Advisory Committee should have the power to levy penalties, including liquidated damages and debarment from future work funded by the city against employers who fail to make progress towards meeting the mandates. It's very important that as we sit here today, and I think we can all agree that Sagamore is here with the greatest intentions of the world. They want to build a great project for the city of Baltimore. I think everybody here wants to see it happen. Everyone here wants to see this city advance. But what happens down the road sometimes is out of their control. When a contractor is hired and that contractor hires another contractor and another contractor down the road, it's not Sagamore's fault. It's the people that do business. So by having these mechanisms in place, it's a way to hold the system accountable as opposed to holding the individual accountable. So we believe strongly in that. We also believe that the city should publish an annual report detailing Port Covington's progress toward establishing these community benefits. So with that, we'd love to answer some questions as far as the amendment and the process. Mr. Coles, I know you haven't spoken. If you have anything you would like to add.
So I'll be brief. Good evening, everyone. My name is Mark Coles. I'm the Executive Director of Choice Community Hub, Community Hub for Opportunities in Construction Employment. We actually represent 28 affiliates across DC and Baltimore. I just like to say that Choice is committed to workforce development. We already have an apprenticeship readiness model that we have stood up in our other jurisdiction. We're in the process of standing one up here in Baltimore. We had meetings with the mayor of Baltimore prior to the unrest in Baltimore City, where we were talking about our apprenticeship readiness programs and sort of working with folks to help them obtain soft skills so that they can increase their chances for success in our industry. I think this is an opportunity to address some of the underlying issues that led to the unrest in Baltimore. And I'm hoping that this isn't going to be a development where we're just going to these are going to be jobs that are going to pay substandard wages, as opposed to careers that are going to pay family-sustaining wages, where people can take care of themselves and take care of their families, get off the dependence of government, and thrive in a career. And that's what we support. And we hope that we take the opportunity with this development to make sure that mechanisms are in place to ensure that that happens. Thank you.
Councilwoman Clark.
First of all, very impressive, everyone, and very exciting. I'd like to go back to, if I may, to Unite Here and just spend a moment saying how important it is not only that we get it right about construction jobs and career ladders and training as part of that, but also for the jobs that occur at this site through leases, through sales agreements, through however the owners choose to create the commercial and business and even maybe manufacturing environment. Once upon a time, there was a man who was head of the AFL-CIO for Metropolitan Baltimore. And we were trying to develop the Inner Harbor to help replace some of the manufacturing jobs we were losing. We knew it wouldn't pay as much, but we expected them to be decent jobs. We invested a lot of money in infrastructure through bonds, and we also tried to attract places like hotels that would be there. One of them was the Hyatt, but they didn't have the money to make construction work. So so Tom Bradley, this man, said that he would organize labor and go to the feds to get a UDAG grant to make that happen. $20 million. They shook hands because the Hyatt agreed that if he would do that and he succeeded, labor peace would prevail at the Hyatt. That was in 1978. Roxy, what year was it that finally the sit-ins, the protests, the national actions got the Hyatt to let people who work there in this Inner Harbor have labor peace and decide whether they wanted to unionize? 2013. 2013. That's why a handshake, a goal, is nothing. We lost a generation of people. And so, for issues like that, we need binding legislation, we need contracts, we need real things that run with the land, if necessary, because otherwise it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. And all the good people negotiating today in a moment or in fewer years than we'd like to think won't be here. And the only original intentions and goodwill will be what is carved in stone.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilman Costello.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know we've talked a lot about workforce development, and I've spoken with the folks from Sagamore about that, and I was wondering if we could hear from them some of the things that they've been working on.
Well, of
in
course.
response to some
You
of
didn't
the
have to request that. I'm going there.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. So, the developer.
Thank you. Sure. We're actually going to have 3 batters on this one. Each of us have a different piece of this.
Okay, bring it a
agreement.
little
Oh,
closer.
sorry, how's that?
Use your outside voice.
You do not want that. So it's interesting, and I'm glad we're all here. On Friday afternoon, we met with Mark Coles, and we had the Build Up Baltimore letter on the table in front of us, and we said, we're inclined to say yes. What if we just say yes? What if we do this? We looked at all of the construction goals and everything else, and we said, what about that? And Mark said, no. No. Well, these would just have to be goals. It couldn't be a commitment. So we went through the weekend. Well, we sent it to you. You have it. You received it last night, where we drafted this language into an agreement and said, look, this is extraordinary. If we as a group can pull this off, this is something really quite extraordinary. And so we said, we will support you in this effort. We will say, now what you asked of us was that we could carve out or set aside for minority businesses, give the PLA to the unions, but carve out for the minority businesses. And we said, we need to invert that, because our position, the city's policy, the position, the law, and the MOUs we've already entered into prioritize women and minority Baltimore City businesses first in our program for, not just for workforce development, but for small business building capacity. And so what we said is we would do the inverse, though. We could potentially carve out a portion for the unions, provided you would deliver on the things in this letter.
Can I respond to that real quick, Ms. Paff? Yeah. I know she did, Mark. This is not a union or non-union document. There is zero in this document that forces anything to be done union. This is a document for the city of Baltimore, and this is a document that, quite frankly, my colleague, Mr. Coles, does not have the authority to sign off on. This is a plan for workforce development. So I just wanted to say we appreciate the offer.
We're not offering it to the group. Choice came in to negotiate an agreement on behalf of Choice and its affiliates. So that's us all. But Mark has co-signed on this letter. You're sitting together here. So it was reasonable for us to assume that this is the language that Choice was willing to implement. Now, whether or not that ends up being the case, this still is an extraordinary agreement that you're asking for. And you are asking for a project labor agreement that no one else is asking for a preference. No one else has asked for a preference.
It's not a preference.
Right.
Yeah, but that's not, okay, you got it. Go ahead.
Okay. Not the minority businesses, not the women-owned businesses, not the 150-year-old Baltimore City businesses that are already doing work on our site. No one has asked us for a preference. Choice did ask us for a preference, and you did in your proposal to us. And we responded with this. Now, if you want to continue the discussion, that's all you have to do. We said, take yes for an answer. I don't know if you want to do that or if you can do that on behalf of you or whoever. But there is work that we can do, Mark. I mean, we can close the gap. I don't think that our positions are different. I think that our positions align. We want good career paths built for Baltimore City residents. We want that pipeline developed. We want all of those things. We want shuttling. What we asked in our agreement with Choice is that, hey, help us shuttle people back and forth. Give a percentage of the dues that go to Choice to programs at different local universities to help folks build other types of career ladders. And that's what we're asking for. So I think that there is a continuum of jobs that should be available at Port Covington. We actually thought that this proposal, if somebody would commit to deliver on it, it was worth an agreement to say, we'll endorse that. We'll endorse your effort to deliver on this and we will put a contract behind it. We will put real dollars behind doing that.
Thank you.
So,
Mr. Coles.
I'd just like the clarification. So Caroline, were you in that meeting Friday, were you advocating that all contractors working on the development adhere to those hiring goals?
Under the
or
PLA.
Just union contractors?
Under the PLA. You've asked for a PLA on this, and the PLA would apply to the qualified union contractors. You have our proposal. You have our proposal, Mark.
Yes.
Why not just respond to it?
So why aren't those good shared goals for all the contractors working on that development? Why are you trying to carve out and mandate that just the union contractors who pay fair wages and benefits adhere to hiring goals and all the other contractors working on the development get a pass on it? How is that fair?
Nobody else is asking for a preference. Nobody else has said to us, if these 3 union bidders, or let's reverse it. Let's say it's 3 minority subcontractors. If 3 minority subcontractors bid on the project and they are within a certain percentage of engineer's estimate, you still want it to go to the union. You don't want it to go to them, because Sean Malone was in the meeting and he said, how about if we did that? What if we did it the other way? What if we said X number of Baltimore City subcontractors or X number of minority contractors had to bid?
You're not answering the question.
I want to jump in here. What we just witnessed is the reason why the city needs to engage, and that the city needs to adopt the workforce plan. This plan that we are putting forth is not a negotiation by the unions in Sagamore. This is a plan for the city to develop a workforce to deal with the real issues that happens during this process of workforce development and economic development. So what we just witnessed was divide and conquer at its finest.
Or you could just respond.
Good evening. My name is Alicia Wilson. I'm Vice President for Community Affairs and Legal Advisor to Sagamore Development. I just want to start by saying Mr. Williams said, workforce development is not philanthropic, and I agree. It's an investment. And we have been working very closely with the Council President's Office. I thank you for your leadership on the commitment to workforce development investment in this city. Over the course of almost a year, we've been working very diligently on the numbers and the work behind the plan that we hope to be able to announce in concert with the City Council President very shortly. Let me just talk about a couple of things. We did an asset mapping. To my left is Ed Trumbull with ICF, who is an economist and workforce development expert that we engaged long ago to do a great deal of the work in the numbers. Mr. Wilson was at one of our workforce development, Turnaround Tuesday was at our workforce development summit that we had on June 13th, where about 100 workforce development training providers, unions, even philanthropists were there to really talk through the issues sort of behind the wall of what are the numbers. We revealed our projections. for year 1, year 2, year 3, what jobs are coming online. We were even able to project what type of jobs were coming online and when. I'm going to turn it over to Ed to talk about 51%. There's been a lot of discussion regarding the percentages of Baltimore City workers. What is the workforce that is ready and trained, not just people who want to work, but those who are trained for the positions that are coming online right now, and what work do we need to do together in concert to build that workforce for those jobs that are coming on 3 years down the road, 5 years down the road. We've also been working very closely with the Mayor's Office on Employment Development on this. I think, I forget your name, the gentleman the gentleman next to you, but talked about there being an advisory committee to really vet and look at this. We've been working on a local hiring advisory group, which is also mentioned in the MOU with the city. So your thought is in concert with what the MOUs that are with the city. On the transportation front, in the MOU with the city, we've already committed to subsidizing and supplying transportation to the site. In fact, I had a meeting today talking about links from East and West Baltimore and South Baltimore to the site so that the folks in my neighborhood in East Baltimore don't say I have to ride 2 hours to get to a job in Port Covington, that they have access to that. And finally, I'm going to turn it over to Ed Trumbull just to talk a little bit. We did a 2-hour-long presentation on it. We will not do that tonight, but just to talk about what are the real numbers behind this and build. And I don't know if many people were invited to the workforce development meeting. Some couldn't attend, but just to reveal to everyone in real time what those numbers are and sort of forecast what our plan is, which is still being baked, but we will be able to hopefully reveal that shortly. So Ed?
Thank you, Alicia. My name is Ed Trumbull. I'm a vice president with ICF International. ICF is a professional service company. It stands for the Inner City Fund. We were created in 1969 on the war on poverty. We now have about 6,500 professionals around the world. And I've had the pleasure of working with Sagamore Development on the Port Covington project, along with several of my colleagues. Anamita Gall leading the asset mapping, Trevor Hofberger also involved with the asset mapping, Dr. Yvette Lamb leading our research and evidence-informed practice. And I just kind of wanted to share some of the thoughtful delivery that's gone on behind the scenes here. So it's really interesting. Dr. Richard Clinch, who's actually in the audience, Dr. Clinch is actually the executive director of the Jacob France Institute at the University of Baltimore. He's a national treasure. He's a national gem, as was his colleague, Dr. David Stevens. Richard actually produced the economic impact. Our job was actually to take the economic impact and translate it into the industries and occupations. And what's really interesting, when you look at the industries and occupations for those first 5 years, from 2016 to 2021, about 11,566 construction jobs are created. But to your point, 16,000 follow-on jobs are created. And there's actually a pivot at around 2019, 2020, when the construction jobs actually start declining and the follow-on jobs increase. So Sagamore has actually been very involved in the asset mapping. Because the construction jobs were the first jobs, we've actually gone great detail into Baltimore's construction industries, employment, and training providers. And we've identified approximately 30 of them. And so whether it's Civic Works or the Mayor's Office of Employment Development or the Center for Urban Families or Humanum or Mergenthal or Carver or Baltimore City Community College or the apprenticeships, the skilled trades. Yeah, Project Jumpstart with a Jobs Opportunity Task Force. Project Jumpstart is actually, it's an excellent program. So we do work around the United States. And I've been in the employment and training field for 25 years. My first job, I was actually hired by Marion Pines. And actually, I worked for Governor William Donald Schaefer, and I was K through 12 hired and workforce advisor. I worked for the State Workforce Investment Board. I actually had Jason's job at a local level. So I have great respect for Jason and what he does at the Mayor's Office of Employment Development. I've been a national workforce executive and actually done work for the United States Department of Labor, HHS, Justice. So we've done the labor projections, we've done the asset mapping, we've engaged employers, we've had a focus group with construction-related employers. The number one thing they wanted was a clearinghouse. And the number two thing they said, we want to actually find out what works for whom and why. And what was really interesting, when we engaged the employment and training providers in the construction industries, they actually said the first thing they had a real challenge identifying individuals that had the knowledge, skills, and abilities and perseverance and aptitude to go into the construction field. And what's really interesting is that of those 30 or so organizations, about 2,600 individuals are annually enrolled. About 380 actually graduate. That's a 14% rate. That's an 86% attrition. And so part of that is a second area that the providers had was actually they said, we're going to be very self-disclosing. We don't do a very good job at capturing information. We don't do a very good job of reporting it or analyzing it. And so one of the takeaways in Sagamore's proposal, their workforce development strategy as it's evolving, the meeting that we had on June 13th with 100 or so community providers. So after the meeting was over, Alicia actually facilitated a session with the providers that were there. It was about an hour or two long. Yeah, and we actually shared a link so that the providers could go online and they could update their asset mapping. They could update who they serve, where they're located, different capabilities. And what was really interesting, the individuals and organizations were there. They said, we really need an intermediary. And we're really interested in having a stronger research and data and analysis. So there's kind of convergence of what the employers are interested in and what the providers are interested in. But we also recognize this all comes down to Baltimore City residents. And the strategy that is emerging with Sagamore, there are two components to it. One is an intermediary, and that would actually be to collect the information from those people that are job ready and a database, and then have the employers being able to draw from that. And the intermediary will work with all workforce organizations in Baltimore City. And we estimate, so actually Kurt Summers from ABAG estimates there are about 100 or 130 workforce organizations in Baltimore City. Let's work with all of them. And then the second is actually a talent development. So we've actually heard from pre-apprenticeships and apprenticeships. We actually definitely see the need and demand for having a talent development system. And at the front end, to have a rigorous assessment. We're talking about legal services, we're talking about expungement, we're talking about mental health, we're talking about drug and alcohol abuse counseling, we're talking about GEDs. We're talking, why do most individuals in an apprenticeship leave in the second or third year? It's mathematics. They can't pass the math. So you actually need to have strong mathematics at the front end. And then to actually move on to the fundamentals. And then to actually move into the higher end trades, HVAC, mechanical, electrical, plumbing. So we see that as a template for the construction field, but we actually see it evolving over time to the other areas. So finance, insurance, real estate, hotel, hospitality, information technology, cybersecurity. So Sagamore's actually been engaged in a long-term workforce strategy that's evolving. And it's actually a tremendous amount of thought and deliberation and independent analysis and looking at national best practices. So I thought it was the United States Department of Labor, Health and Human Services, and Commerce 2 years ago, Vice President Biden released a report on what works in job training. And it comes down to work-based training, labor market information and guidance, post-secondary education and industry-recognized credentials, flexible and innovative skill building, and system coordination and integrated education and training work supports. And Sagamore understands that, they value and appreciate that, and I actually think they're working to engage with genuine partners.
And just to close, I just want to close on a point Mr. Coles made, and I agree with you. People shouldn't be making just jobs to get by. And you don't even think they should be doing careers that help them just satisfy their families. I really think they need to build wealth through ownership. And this workforce development strategy that we've worked almost a year on really is jobs are good, careers are better, but ownership is best. And that's what we're focused on in trying to really build up Baltimore and move Baltimore forward. So thank you. I'm happy to answer any question. Any questions that folks may have.
Thank you. As much as you can summarize your... As much as you can summarize your testimony response, would you do that in writing for us?
Yes,
please?
sir.
Okay.
Chairman Stokes,
Thank you.
if I may make one comment upon closing, I appreciate the work that was put into this workforce development study. And not to get into rebuttals or back and forth, but not one mention of wages. Not one mention of wages. Somebody who wants a job in the construction industry needs to be paid a living wage, needs to be paid a very good wage. Our work on this side of the table has been talking to those folks that have dropped out. Not the folks that have remained, but the folks that dropped out. And they don't want to work as day laborers for $8 an hour. They don't want to work in seasonal employment for less than a living standard. So wages have to be a part of this conversation, and it's very important. Second, on the numbers, 11,566 jobs. I'm going to go higher than 51% because maybe I would have dropped out in my second year too because my math isn't that good. But if this city can't come up with 6,000 people to go to work in the construction industry, then something's wrong with our system.
I just want to say, too, also appreciate your numbers, but years ago we had manufacturing companies here, and training was tied to a job. If we had jobs, the training would be completely different, and people would be there for those positions.
So, Ms. Herbert-Ian.
Just briefly, thank you for your time. We talk to lots and lots of workers and their families all the time. My organizers are out in the neighborhoods all the time talking to people, talking to their family members. We hear so often, I went to this training program, I went to that training program, I went to that training program, I can't get a job. We've been through this process before. We had the Hilton open, we had the casino open, we'd have other large venues open. There are 100 people for every job. Lots of people apply for the jobs. There's lots of people that want jobs. So while we appreciate the training aspect, people get those jobs and then they can't support themselves, and that's what we're trying to avoid. We're trying to say, can we get jobs that people are going to be able to afford to live?
Chairman Stokes, just lastly, we're hearing more about...
Acknowledge who you are, please.
I'm Rob English, I'm lead organizer of BUILD. We're hearing more of Sagamore's workforce development plan. Council President Young, we're hearing you that you have a strong commitment to workforce development and hiring. And at the end of the day, what this conversation comes down to is Sagamore coming to the table, just as you, Councilman Stokes, and Council President Young have asked the United organizations to come to the front with real amendment language that's specific, that has mandates, that is accountability. And if we can come to an agreement on 51% local hiring for all jobs, then let's move forward and it's a win-win. If we can come to an agreement on what the accountability is to ensure those folks from Baltimore City are employed, it's a win-win, and we make this deal what's best for Baltimore. And anything less than real specifics with mandates and clawbacks becomes two Baltimores once again. Because we've heard this for generations. This is a different version. It's well thought out, but we've got to get to specifics. And I would ask you, Councilman Stokes, when is that going to happen as part of this process?
Yes, I thank you both for talking, because what I hear is, here's what we want to do, here's what we'd like to see, and I hear we've already agreed to everything and more. But obviously there's something, see this big gap in the middle? That's what I'm looking at. So I'm going to ask everybody to come back to the table, please, and to really negotiate rather than talk to each other across the table. I understand. I am not putting the weight on either. I'm just asking, please. Otherwise, it will come into this committee, and we'll start crafting the language, and as my president say, where nobody will get everything. But I think there is a win-win-win. The third win being the city and the citizens of our great city. And I think we can get a win-win-win, and I think actually we probably can get most everything, right? Because neither of us is expecting the moon. We're expecting, though, that it will be a huge win for the citizens of Baltimore. I know that's where Sagamore is. I know that's where my friends are on this side of the table also. So I'm going to ask you guys, before we come back together, if not next week, by the third week, when we really want to drive the language, but we don't want to have it all come to us at the last meeting, if you would get together in the next several days or so, and if you need a referee, Council President Young will come. Mary Pat would not be a good referee, but anyway, trying to throw some levity into it. But thanks, everybody is on point. Thank you. I thought you were going to do the full 2-hour presentation, but thank you. Again, just trying to be levity. Thank you so much. We're going to segue. I was just going to ask, Mr. Middleton, how are you tonight, sir? Did you see Mr. Gaines? I mentioned that because the three of us worked together many, many years ago. Okay, so we're going to segue into 2 more segments, and then we're going to call it an evening. One is the education funding, and then second, we will be talking about the fiscal and performance accountability. I'm going to ask, because I see the education department is here, and she's like, can I go home, Councilman? But she didn't ask me that. But I'm going to ask her to come and talk to us a little bit about what happens with the education funding around these TIFs, pilots, et cetera, for the citizens. And then I'm going to ask those who wish to talk about this issue to come forward. And then I'm going to ask Controller Pratt's office and Finance and BDC to stick around for the last piece when we talk about accountability. Is that good? Okay, so would you open us up by talking about this matter, and then I think ACLU and others want to come forward.
Yes. Thank you, Chairman Stokes, and members of the committee. I am Dewana Starrett. I'm the Director of Governmental Relations for the Baltimore City Board of School Commissioners. And thank you for allowing me to bring forth some information that I think this body needs to consider, as well as Sagamore Development needs to consider when it comes to education aid. Education aid in the state of Maryland is provided to each school district based on the local wealth of that county or city in which the school district resides. So in Maryland, the more wealthier school districts receive less state aid, the less wealthy school districts receive more state aid. Baltimore City, for FY17, the school system receives approximately $870 million from the state of Maryland of its $1.3 billion budget. That's a large amount of money. And when it calculates wealth in the formula to provide the state education aid, it looks at the assessable tax base. And it's the value of the assessable tax base. It does not take into consideration any special incentives that have been provided to the local district for that property. So in Baltimore City, the impact is that there is a potential that there could be less education aid provided because the city would appear wealthier than it actually is. It's more of an artificial wealth. And in fact, that did happen a bit this year, and we lost some education aid because relative to the rest of the state, Baltimore City appeared to be about 2 times wealthier than the average of the other jurisdictions in the state. And I know from, I'm sure you all know that our kids in Baltimore City schools are not wealthier. And so we wanted the city council to consider this information, as well as to know that we heard that Port Covington was planning to come and ask for a large TIF. And so with the work of Delegate Maggie McIntosh and Senator Nathaniel McFadden, we were able to, for the next 2 fiscal years, receive a hold harmless, which means that for FY18 and FY19, the State Department of Assessments and Taxation will do 2 calculations for us. One with TIFs that were proposed and received after May 1st, 2016, and without TIFs. And whichever calculation is better, we will receive that amount of money. But that is only a hold harmless for 2 years. We have that there so that this body, along with the state of Maryland, can come and figure out a way that we can provide the appropriate level of education needs and funding to our kids so that we are not inadvertently losing money from the state because we're trying to provide economic development packages to developers.
Great, thank you for that explanation, and certainly we have to be sure, at least this council person wants to be sure that education funding is held harmless beyond the 2 years, not with a promise, but actually that it is held, and we intend on this and any other development to work to see that that happens. So let me stop at this point. Councilwoman Clark. Hold on. Yeah.
So if I could ask the question, our delegates, our senator, have written a 2-year hold harmless that gives the state the choice to take the lower wealth that takes
to give the benefit,
or us the benefit of the state choosing the lower of the 2, which is wealth with and wealth without.
We would receive,
TIFs.
once they do the calculation with a TIF and without a TIF, the amount that is higher, meaning we will receive more state education aid, is the amount that the school district will receive.
Okay, so not to get into exactly what that means, TIFs. I mean, I know what a TIF is, but you mean the assessments due to TIF-related projects?
Yes.
Okay, so given that, we got it. What do you want out from this project? Because here you are.
Well, I was here really just to explain that there are some inadvertent ramifications that occur when there are certain economic development packages. And in this case, it could inversely affect or negatively affect the state education aid that Baltimore City Schools receives.
Like it did
so we
this
want
year.
to bring to the council, as well as the state, the opportunity now to possibly talk to each other and figure out a way that whether the city could make up the difference, the state could figure out a way to make the difference, but what can happen so that our students don't lose the funding.
Is there something that you want that Port Covington would do? Or you want us to talk to the state and try to figure this out?
I would like any of the 3 parties to figure this out, whether it's the state working with the city, working with Port Covington, but we are stuck in the middle where we receive funds and we are potentially going to lose funding, and we would like to be able to have some discussions about how to recapture that those funds.
Okay, so, and then I'll stop.
Okay.
But, so, one option that comes to mind is that somehow this TIF compensates for losses. It was 25 million this year. It's not nickels and dimes.
Right, exactly.
And so, I mean, this is the first time I'm thinking about this in terms of what you want. I mean, we've all thought about what is going to ever happen to this formula, but I never thought about how do we solve it. And here you are at the table, which is appropriate. But all we can do as is a council is say, gosh, I guess we better go talk to the state and, Delegate McIntosh and all. But I guess, Mr. Chair, Vice Chair, the other option is somehow to have the TIFs hold us for a period of years or something, hold us, the city school system harmless. So I mean, I just think because we're looking for things that go into the bill now, because we only have 5 more council meetings and all bills die.
Well, Councilwoman, I believe we have a panel of education advocates who would be happy to speak to that, but they need for us to stop speaking first.
Story of my life. Thank you.
Okay. Joanna, are you? Okay.
I'm done.
Okay, thank you. All right. We have, is it just the two of you? Okay, all right. Take it away.
Hi, I'm Frank Patinella. I'm the Senior Education Advocate for the ACLU of Maryland's Education Reform Project and the co-chair of the Baltimore Education Coalition. And I just want to be clear that we're on the record here tonight or I'm on the record for the Baltimore Education Coalition as the co-chair.
And my name is Todd Reynolds. I'm the political coordinator for the American Federation of Teachers in Maryland, which in Baltimore includes the Baltimore Teachers Union. We are a member of Build Up Baltimore. We're supportive of our union brothers and sisters in that organization, as well as Bridge and Build, and we support the housing demands of Port 3 as well.
So we've been to the hearings, and there has been some attention paid to the education funding loss due to the wealth gains properties of Port Covington Development District. And we've heard that from the Department of Finance that and from BDC that MuniCap did an estimate, and the estimate is around estimated at $315 million over the 41-year TIF. And I just wanted to make sure that people had the information, the ACLU's analysis of MuniCap's analysis on this estimate. And we're finding that their estimate falls short by at least double. So the 315 million should be closer to 630 million or even more. And that's based on their methodology. If you use the Department of Legislative Services at the state level, their methodology, so for every 100 million in property wealth gain, 1 million is subtracted or reduced from education funding. If you use that methodology, then we're looking somewhere around 1.6 billion. So it's important for the City Council to really understand the impact of the Port Covington TIF. And to get an accurate estimate, I would go back to MuniCap and have them look at the numbers, because what they did wrong was that they looked at one aspect of the funding formula, and that's the foundation part of the funding formula. But Baltimore City gets...
Hold on for a second. I'm just going to pause here. Have you guys gotten a copy? And you don't need to respond if you don't. It's just have you gotten a copy of their analysis? Okay, good. Thanks.
Great. So just to let people know that the parts of the formula that were left out of the analysis, there are basically 3 big parts of the formula: the compensatory education, special education program of the formula, and English language learners. So those 3 aspects of the formula are actually bigger than the foundation formula. So if you apply the wealth reductions to those parts of the formula, that's how we get the projection of that the impact should be double. We talked to the Department of Legislative Services about our assertion, and they agree with us. So this is the state policy people that work on this education funding formula. They understand it. They agree with us, and also they also stand by their rule of thumb, in that for every 100 million gained in property wealth, that there's $1 million reduction in state education aid. So we have that on the charts here, and for anyone that is interested in seeing our information, we'd be happy to provide it to the public, to Sagamore City Council if you didn't receive it. And we have this displayed in a graph as well. So we've heard that in terms of finding a solution for this, that the Department of Finance said that, oh, we have the revenue that would cover this loss, but based on the range in which we could see the reductions over the 41 years, we're, at the high end, we're not seeing that the revenues would cover the education loss. And there's no guarantee that there's going to be a fix at the state level, because people seem pretty confident there, but we have not heard the governor say anything about this. We haven't heard, we know that we have hard work in delegation, and that Delegate McIntosh and Senator McFadden want to see that, and our delegation want to see that hold harmless continued, but we don't have a guarantee, and the Senate President hasn't weighed in on this. We haven't heard anything from the House Speaker or any leaders, other leaders at the state level. Yes.
Councilman Costello.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Vice Chairman. Today, I know that the City Council President received a letter from President Miller and Speaker Bush addressing this issue. And I think he's planning on circulating that to our colleagues today, and I can't speak for him, but I'm sure he'd be willing to share that. Yeah. Just indicating, what had happened with the formula and with the legislation that Delegate McIntosh sponsored to address this in the short term, and indicating that there has been a work group put together, which I believe had been in the works for some time, and that there was a commitment to study this, quote, diligently and seek a solution for this challenge for Baltimore City and other jurisdictions in need. So that's certainly, that's good news today. I think it's worth noting in the context of this conversation, and provides more hope that this situation will get resolved. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Just one response to that. We know that there is an adequacy study group right at the state level that's looking at the education funding formula, and they are going to look at this, the issue that wealth and TIFs have, the impact on education funding. What they're talking about in that adequacy study group is a partial fix, like Ohio has implemented. So perhaps, if, let's just say the impact is $1 billion, the Ohio model might take care of less than half of the impact over the 40 years. So we don't want an Ohio fix. We want 100% fix, 100%, hold harmless at the state level, so that there's not $1, reduced from Baltimore City schools. And so we encourage, one of our asks is that we encourage City Council to get solid commitments from state leadership, and I don't see why Sagamore can't help with that. If the state wants this to happen, perhaps they can go to the governor and get in writing that this is a priority and that there would be a 100% hold harmless for Baltimore City schools. Secondly,
let me drill down on that for a second. What would constitute a solid commitment by state leaders? And I ask that in the sense that what can they say other than we promise we'll try to figure this out? Because anything more than that isn't legitimate. I mean, the General Assembly has to pass something and the governor has to sign it. Unless you're going to go around and poll a majority of members of the General Assembly and get them to all sign on to a letter saying we promise to pass a bill that works this out, what kind of commitment at the state level would be what you're talking about?
I think just working there for years, if the Senate President wants something to happen, if the House Speaker wants something to happen, and of course if the Governor wants something to happen, then it's going to happen. They can move their respective branches of government to support it. So I think it's an important...
A letter from them?
Yes, something in writing, a letter from them, a promise for 100% fix. I think that would be a great thing for the City Council to work on. Perhaps. So, Councilwoman asked for 41 years. Yes, for 41 years, we want the hold harmless. Secondly, we also think the bill can be amended to make sure that because you're right, if there's not legislation passed, then there's not a guarantee that it's going to happen. So you can have something in writing and something could happen, right? Whatever, someone gets unelected as Senate President and things change, and there's no guarantee that state funding would be fixed. So perhaps the bill can be amended, and we sent this in at some point, but we also heard from the city's legislative department that there are some problems with the language. We would like this language to be able to work. We want to make sure that the State Department of Education certifies annually, based on the assessments from the State Department of Assessments and Taxation, the loss of state education aid to Baltimore City schools due to the formula's recognition of total assessed property value of Port Covington development compared to the value of the assessed property in FY17. So it's certifying a baseline in FY17 of what that property value is worth. Then every year thereafter, you subtract the difference in terms of what that property wealth has done to reduce education aid. So it could be 20 years later, we want that increment to be compared against the baseline in FY17, because that's the real loss, that's the real impact that Port Covington has on education. So, right, establishing the baseline and every year subtracting, finding out the difference between the baseline and the incremental gain in wealth. Does that make sense? And
Councilman.
So here's the part of this that I think is going to be incredibly unpopular, but I think it's true, which is that even if we had some type of agreement where the developer would pay whatever the difference was, and I think, and I know we've talked about the special tax that they're required to pay to make sure that city services are held harmless, and we could include this as a city service. That money would come to Baltimore City. There is no way that we can legally guarantee that the mayor and city council over the next 41 years are going to take that money out of the general fund and provide additional money to the school system to make up the funding. We can't guarantee that.
But if the money, if there is an agreement that Sagamore gives the money to fill in the difference, and it does go to the mayor, and at his or her discretion to put towards education, then there's at least that expectation, right? That
there's expectations
it goes to education.
And I'm sorry. The reason I'm raising this point is because, and I may do this more often than our colleagues in Annapolis would enjoy, but I really don't want to let them off the hook one little bit on this.
No.
This is a problem at the General Assembly. The fact that this education funding formula hasn't already been fixed is a failure there. This is not a city. It's a city problem in terms of the repercussions, but it's their fault that this hasn't been fixed for good yet. I know that they've fixed it for a 2-year period, and I know that they're planning to fix it permanently, and that's great. But we should not have to be going through all this right now because they didn't do their work.
Sure. So if I may address that, Councilman Henry. So when every year, AFT, Maryland, Baltimore Teachers Union, we're not the only ones, obviously, Beck, a number of Baltimore City residents go to Annapolis during the legislative session to fight for education dollars. Every year. And you guys are there too. And there's plenty of people in the audience there who do this too. And every time we go there, it's not just Baltimore City delegates, senators are saying this. It is them, but it's also people throughout the states. Like, when is Baltimore City going to step up to the plate? They do say that, and they point to charts to us that Baltimore City is not contributing funds to its school system like other jurisdictions. So we're kind of caught in the middle. Sure. We're kind of like, okay, as the people who are in the schools on a day-to-day basis, we just want everyone to come together.
How many of those delegations saying that we're not doing our part have their own local police forces that cost $500 million of general fund revenue?
Well, you can make that argument to the state senators and delegates.
I'm sure we have state senators and delegates who make that argument.
And they turn around and say, why is it that, well, I mean, this is an argument going back to what control the city council have over budgets, but that is an argument that we see happening whenever we go and knock on doors in Annapolis to be like, hey, we need to make sure that we're not losing funding to Baltimore City schools. And Baltimore and the folks in Annapolis say, we'll do what we can, but something needs to be done at the city level to meet us halfway.
I want to move on with Mr. English, please, and then I want to go to the developers.
Councilman Stokes, it sounds like we got on a tangent. I think the core issue is what Councilman Henry and yourself have brought up, is that the ACLU has done impeccable analysis. They're the best in the state. They understand the educational arena. The analysis is there that we as a city are going to lose money for education. Councilman Stokes, yourself, and many on this committee, Councilman Reisinger and others, Mary Pat Clark, Councilman Clark, have fought to make that not happen. We have an amendment to submit. We have language that says specifically, as Mr. Patinel laid out, it's beholden on the council then, if this language does not pass the legal department, then develop other language to hold our schools harmless. Absent of that, vote no for the TIF because it's hurting our schools.
Did they speak to this or they did not? Okay. All right, I want to move to the developer. Councilwoman Clark, you had something?
Okay, I'm sorry. What's the language? I missed it. What does it say that we, the city,
What is the language?
Speak to the
hold
the school system harmless for losses?
Well, I'll read what we have here, but I think what Mr. English said, it's important that it has to pass legal muster and that it has to get at that baseline funding from the beginning. But I'll read what we have. Yes.
Right now, this evening...
not Madam President, but...
Let me just say this. Because I'm sort of missed a meeting. I'm catching up. So I need to know what people want, not whether it's legal. Later, we'll fix
I'm
that.
asking for the language, and then the committee needs language, and then we can determine through our law department and others.
Okay, here's what we have. The Maryland State Department of Education shall certify annually, based on assessments from the State Department of Assessments and Taxation, the loss of state education aid to Baltimore City schools due to the formula's recognition of total assessed property value of the Port Covington development, compared to the value of the assessed property in FY17. And we have Sagamore is required to pay that difference to Baltimore City Public Schools by July 1st each year. And I understand that that last sentence is where there might be some legal issues there. Right. Sagamore pays the money to the city.
Excuse me. Okay. Give us the language, please.
I can provide that written to you.
And that would be, that's an average. It could be more in some years and less in other years.
We got it.
About
Councilwoman Clark.
I'm sorry, just about this. how it works. So what you're doing is you're saying that you're looking at the property increases in that area only, and then at the percentage of the loss that represents, not the whole city. Thanks.
Thank you. Sagamore?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me just say, we are on the same side here. We fought with you in the General Assembly to make sure that HB 285, I think it was passed. We have our own registered lobbyists who worked on that because it was important to us, both as developers of Port Covington and as citizens of Baltimore, to make sure that that happened. And it was a good interim solution. The HB 285 specifically requires that this be considered in the adequacy study. And I will say, for what it's worth, that I have faith that Chairman McIntosh, Senator McFadden, Senate President Miller, Speaker Bush, and others are going to fix this. And if you don't have the same faith in them that I do, then that's up to you. But I think that is a great deal of momentum behind a permanent fix. It's not helpful to sit here on this issue in particular. We have substantive issues we've been discussing about who's going to benefit in this way and that way. Clearly, we are not going to take money out of the pockets of Baltimore City schools. We have said that publicly. We'll say it again tonight. Mr. Kraus will get up here if you ask him and tell you the same thing that he has said previously. The city's not going to issue bonds if it's going to take money out of the city schools. My own view is that this is an issue that is important to think about, but it will go away. And it will go away because the legislature, the president, the speaker, the chairwoman, and everybody else are going to fix it like they said they would. And I agree with Councilman Henry that it's a shame that the legislature hasn't fixed it, but they are now very focused on it, and I think they are going to fix it. In any event, the risk is not on you. It's not on the city. It's on the developer. No fix, no bonds. And the idea that let me just say that this idea that the developer should sort of indemnify against this possibility of that it's not going to be fixed, I would never advise my client to undertake that kind of an indemnity. First of all, it would make the project essentially unfinanceable to have this number hanging out there. The correct approach is to set the standard that it's not going to happen unless this is fixed, and then to work like heck together, you and us and everybody else in next year's General Assembly, with the commitments that have been made to us by all these people who are genuinely and truly committed to this, to fix the issue. 2 more points. You can run this thing sort of to an absurdity, because to say that there's a law or a situation that needs to be changed or that needs to remain the same, anything can happen. This council can decide next year to change the law. The General Assembly can decide to change the law. The voters can by referendum amend the Constitution of the state of Maryland, and maybe Texas can secede from the Union. Anything can happen. There has to be some real-world, realistic assessment of what is likely to happen, and then to manage those reasonable risks in a reasonable way. And I think the evidence is that this is something that is going to get sorted out, and the risk can be reasonably allocated. But I will tell you that saying the developer should indemnify against that is certainly not something that I would recommend the client undertake. And the last point is this. We're losing sight of the fact, Mr. English sits there and says, if you don't like this issue, vote no, kill Port Covington. Isn't the solution to all of these problems ultimately to promote Port Covington? Isn't the conversation we've been having?
Yeah, 4 o'clock.
Isn't the conversation we've been having with the unions and all of these other advocates and all of these other communities and SB6 and all the other workforce things that we're doing? Folks, if there's no Port Covington, zero of that happens. It has to happen. So we have to find a way to work together. And on this issue, this education issue, we are completely aligned with you. Let's go get it done. But let's not argue about imposing unreasonable risks on parties who can't possibly, in the real world of financing projects, undertake them. Thank you.
You want a rebuttal? You good? Any response?
Councilman Stokes, we heard very clearly now from Mr. Laria that, in his own words, if there's no fix to education funding, no bonds. Did you hear that, sir?
I did.
So if that is the agreement that's in writing from Sagamore, and that's guaranteed, then we would come to the table on that. That's not what we've heard before. That's new information. We have met with Sagamore. They very clearly said, and we recognized Sagamore and Mr. Geddes and others for going to Annapolis to lobby for the current moratorium. But we'll go to the table on that. No fix of school funding, no bonds. That would protect our educational system. If that's what you heard, right, Councilman Stokes?
I apologize to you. My attention was taken. Would you restate?
No fix on education. In other words, we trust the state legislators. In case that does not happen, then there are no bond issuance. That would take care of this deal.
I'm asking Mr. Krause from Finance to come forward, please. His name was spoken. Mr. Krause, you heard particularly from Mr. Laria invoking you to speak to this point of no bond, no fix, no bond.
Well, first, I would also like to echo that I think we're all in theory in agreement here that we do believe that the project should not take money from the school system. I think we've said that from the very beginning, and we'll say it again. As far at our previous presentation, we discussed the impact of school funding. Now we can talk about what that number is, but what I'm suggesting is that the analysis would have to include the secondary benefits of the project, not just the tax increment. And we've got income tax that we'll be getting from the new residents. There'll be energy taxes and a whole host of other things that I think I had described earlier. When you include all of those benefits, in addition to the increment, then we take a look at what is the net impact to the city, and then that will determine, the amount of the exposure and whether or not we move forward. So that is would be my recommendation.
Okay. I don't want to keep going back and forward, but that actually is different than what I heard Mr. Laria
Well, no,
represent.
let me be clear, since it's obviously an important point. I agree with Mr. Krause. I mean, if I shorthanded it, I apologize. But the question is, what effect is it going to have on the funding formula, and how is it going to affect the city? You have to take a look. That's the last point that I just made. You have to take a look at the overall impact of the project. There has to be some accommodation. Once again, this is not about Port Covington providing no benefits and only taking money from the city in some fashion. This is about a net impact to the city which needs to be positive. And by the way, Mr. Chairman, we're not here to play gotcha, as Mr. English appears to want to do. We're here to solve the problem and have a serious conversation, not to play gotcha politics. And I know you're not, and I hope that nobody else is either.
Well, I don't wish us to take it to that level, sir, seriously. I don't think folk are. I think we all have the best of intentions on both sides of the table, including the middle of the table. But so I don't want to carry forward much more. I understand clearly, the committee understands clearly both sides. We understand clearly. And our resolve in this committee is to see that education funding is held harmless, period. We did lose money this past year. Ms. Starrett spoke to that. We lost money for the reasons that were stated, that we have this false wealth. And we don't want to go forward with that. We want to fix. And so, again, as I've said in the previous two panels, we really need to narrow this gap that is between us. I know you want to go, Mr. Badnella, but go.
Quickly. Okay, I just wanted to respond to Mr. Kraus. There have been TIF agreements in the past, and we've been told there would be benefits, more money coming to the coffers. And there's a lot of people working now in Harbor Point and Harbor East and all those other TIF developments that contribute to the coffers, contribute to the wealth of the city, that lead to the reduction of state education funding, yet we did not see any real increase in city education funding due to this wealth gain, despite what the promises were in the past. So that's why we're trying to do something different here. We're trying to explore, what language can be put in the bill so that we have, the best kind of, guarantee possible. I know that
we understand that
the mayor and, the mayor is ultimately responsible for appropriating to the budget, and the city council cannot do that. But we need a better guarantee. We need a better commitment. We need an MOU or something, and where we don't have as much as faith as you do, unfortunately. We'd like to work with you when the session comes around, and hopefully we can get 100% fixed, but we do not have that faith because we've seen education funding cut over the years. And that's why the Baltimore Education Coalition was formed, because we see our school system budget keep getting shaved away. And this year we lost 171 staff in schools. And I just want to see if just raise your hand if you have a child in the city school system. Sagamore, people, grandchildren? I'm going to have a kid.
Hold on. Mr. Badnella, Badnella.
Okay.
Thanks. I'm finished. I'm finished. We understand that all we're beginning to do is to restate what we have said earlier, and I wish not to continue. I'd like the language, I'd like to look it over, I'd like the committee to consider, and that's what we'd like to do. Any response we'd like from the Sagamore to this in writing also. And I do want to move forward, Mr. Reynolds.
Okay.
Are you going to state?
If we can get that letter, because we haven't, and apologies to Councilman Costello, we haven't seen that letter from Senate President Miller or Speaker Bush. We'd love to see it. We are going to go to Annapolis again. Obviously, we'll give you all BTU T-shirts if you guys want to knock on doors with us to get more funding, because that's what needs to happen.
Okay, so let me delve into that tone. I don't know what a letter is worth to my children. They've been promising my children. I don't even get angry. I don't want to get angry. A letter ain't worth it to me. You got that? Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you for the time.
Deliver, deliver, deliver. I'm not interested in anybody's letter or promise, ever, ever. Don't let me use my language. So we're finished, all right? We're finished. Thank you. All right. Right. Here's our last matter for tonight. And pardon me for whatever I did in the last 2 minutes. We want to talk about fiscal and performance accountability. We want to know who's going to watch all of the numbers going forward, who's going to make sure that if we have a mandate or a goal, who's watching those numbers, who's auditing the books going forward for the next 30, 40 years. Talk to us about that. I know that the Comptroller's Office has had conversation or maybe an agreement around some of this. I'm going to ask BDC and Finance if they would come to the table, and Sagamore also to talk to us. Michael Gaines, I'm asking to come forward as a private consultant for this type of accountability. So with those parties and others who wish to talk to this issue, I don't know if Mr. English, if you want to be part of that or not. Oh, I see. Okay. Give them. You ready? You're good. You're here. You're good. You're part of the. the conversation. So, Mr. Cole, why don't you begin?
I really need Mr. Kraus, and he's occupied by ACLU right now.
Okay.
I think to answer the question on the monitoring and the performance, finance does the overwhelming majority of that on all the existing TIFs and pilots, and he can talk a little bit about that.
Okay.
I know that in the MOU, there is also, and Comptroller's office can talk about the auditor, that the position that Sagamore will be funding in the Comptroller's office that will be doing some of the monitoring, and I think we can also, I think Mr. Perkins Cohen gets some of the reports as well. So, Steve, I'll let you answer.
Thanks, Mr. Kraus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's several, I guess, reviews and oversight that are happening. I guess we got some folks down here to the left that will be doing some of the monitoring of the jobs and some of the other reporting going on. But as far as the financial part of it goes, the Department of Finance is primarily responsible for overseeing the financial affairs of each of the TIF districts. And how we do that is that we monitor the construction progress, we disperse the bond proceeds based on construction draws and work in place, and then once the project is completed, we then monitor the activity of that district, the assessable base, the taxes collected, and then we apply that towards the debt service. And when the debt service is due, we compare what we have collected in assessed value, and if there's a deficiency, we issue a special tax. And I think I explained that we have done that about 3 or 4 times in the past. And that's how we kind of, and that goes on for the life of the bonds, where annually we do a review of what's collected and what's due on the bonds, and it is that reconciliation that occurs annually. And there is actually a special tax report that MuniCap completes annually, which goes into greater detail of the progress of the development, as well as the financial aspects of what's collected and what's due. So in that regard, we shore up the debt service and the collection of the revenues.
Okay. We hardly ever see that. We, the council, hardly ever see that. I'm assuming you're doing it. You're saying you're doing it.
Oh, sure.
But we hardly ever see that. We hardly see, this doesn't, I don't mean to, I'm not trying to I'm not trying to hit you. I'm just saying we have to do better. We hardly ever have you guys come to the council and say, here's a report of the TIFs that you have out there.
I mean, we'd be happy
Okay,
to give you those reports.
Yes.
You like them. Okay.
Yes, sir. Okay, thanks. All right.
Thank you for having me this evening. Congratulations to Sagamore. When we brought this issue up about hiring an auditor, they didn't give a second chance, a second thought of approving it. They proved it right on the spot.
You are?
Walter Horton, Department of Real Estate for the Comptroller, Joan Pratt. So the MOU was approved subject to us having an independent auditor review all of the records. In particular, one of the things we want to make certain that we see is compliance with all of the issues, the minority hiring goals, the employment goals, making certain that the money is spent right. I want to see a financial impact study done to do an analysis of what this project has brought to us in addition to just the residents and the buildings. I want to see the spin-off money. In my last presentation before this group, I made a recommendation and a suggestion that in addition to the Board of Finance review of each additional tranche, the tranches go before the Board of Estimates, but they don't come before City Council. So that was one of the recommendations I previously suggested, so that City Council will have knowledge every time an issuance is done as to, hey, this is what was completed on the first project, here's the status reports, and that auditor will help to ensure that those records are kept and maintained properly.
Great. Would you send the committee a copy of the agreement that you currently have?
Yeah, you have a copy of the...
We have it?
You have a copy of the MOU.
We do have it. I'm sorry.
Yes.
Okay, we're good. All right. Ms. Carter, or where do you want to go?
Thank you. I'm Charlie Carter, Executive Director of Maryland Working Families, and I want to start by saying we should take out a Lloyd's of London insurance policy on Maggie McIntosh to make sure she can fix our school funding issues. We started this by asking you, this council, to slow their roll. And I really want to thank you, Councilman Stokes, and this body for taking extra time to allow for public input, especially for the format that you have here tonight. Thank you for allowing us to have this discussion and talk about these important issues. I also want to say that during the course of this, we started out with 4 different coalitions some who were in negotiations with Sagamore, some who were putting pressure on the city council, and I'm really proud to say that now Port 3, which is the coalition that Maryland Working Families is part of, Build Up Baltimore, Build, Bridge, and Brace have all come together to support 3 key issues that we want to see addressed: transparency, financial responsibility, and a citywide community benefits agreement. And together we represent every corner of this city. And I think that's really worth noting. I want to focus on the transparency piece because we've had a lot of public input, but we're really concerned still about some issues around transparency. And I was really happy to hear earlier someone from the Sagamore team talk about this as a public-private partnership. Because when you're asking the taxpayers to come up with $35 million, we certainly see ourselves as partners in this. And we think that with any partnership, it's really important that you know who it is that you're going in partnership with. We don't believe that there's been ample transparency with who exactly Sagamore Development is. They are the people who are applying for the TIF, but as we heard in the last hearing, was raised that in all of the research that's been done on 29 parcels that are part of this TIF, Sagamore is not the title holder of any of those. In fact, it is a series of LLCs and who have some operating agreement with Sagamore, but who is in those LLCs is not public information. We know, quite frankly, more about individuals who are applying to be carpenters on rebuilding our city schools than we know about the people who are part of this, who are asking for this $535 million TIF. And we're asking for the council to do their due diligence and actually find out who is behind these LLCs and to make public the title deeds and the transferred affidavits so that we know exactly who the ownership is and how much equity is in these properties, or if they're leveraged to the hilt. Now, maybe that information has been made public, or that information is available to the finance department, but we feel that the public has a right to this information because we are being asked to get in bed with this development company who has 2 years of experience in development. The other thing is, we're asking, have you seen the pro forma for Sagamore? And if so, can you make that public so that we as the public can have the same level of confidence as you have in understanding who it is we're being asked to get in bed with? I want to raise 2 comparisons. One is the casino. With the process of granting a casino, we not only had to know what the company was who was applying for the casino license, we had to know, and it was made public, who the actual owners were, who had money at stake in that deal. And that was so that the public could be made comfortable with knowing that that we could trust these people to operate the casino. And we're asking for that same level of transparency. We heard, I'm really glad to hear the comptroller talk about having an audit and issuing reports and actually, I'm trying to remember what the amendment you suggested. Oh, the financial impact statement. We're happy to hear that. We believe there should be quarterly reports. We're happy to hear that the finance department is going to get reports on and do comparisons on how they're doing to make sure that they're on schedule with meeting their construction timeline. But we want to know before each tranche is issued that they are also meeting their obligations with the community benefits agreement. So all those other agreements that we believe there should be quarterly reports issued as they are issued in the 21st Century Schools build program, that quarterly the stadium authority issues, like, this is where we are, these are the meetings we had. We believe that should be advised. And then the final part, which was really what the comptroller's office suggested that we wholeheartedly approve of, is that each tranche come before the council, so that the council can see and what the numbers are and represent the interests of the people, and knowing that they get to approve the next issuance of bonds. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Marceline White.
Chair, members of the committee, my name is Marceline White. I'm the Executive Director of the Maryland Consumer Rights Coalition, MCRC. MCRC advances fairness and justice for Maryland consumers through research, education, and advocacy. We have more than 1,000 supporters in Baltimore City, and Baltimore City is also where our office is and where our staff live and work. We're happy to be here tonight. I want to thank the chair and the committee for this hearing and for the opportunity to talk about how we work collectively together to make this agreement as strong as it can be. We have amendment language that I will share with the committee tomorrow. I want to be clear, and I want to address a few additional points building on what Charlie said. The first is in terms of transparency. One of the things we would like to see going forward is the creation of a TIF website, which I believe was in the 2011 recommendations that this committee supported, similar to what happened in Chicago, at the city of Chicago, and I can show you that, I can share that example. But essentially in the TIF website, you would have things like the quarterly updates, the annual reports, and information on all of the TIFs that the city has promoted and supported, so that there's broad transparency and acknowledgement. We also believe that it is important to look going forward. We know that this is amendments to move the bill forward at this point, but we believe that before the next tranche is issued, the first tranche will be issued, before the second tranche, I agree with the comptroller's office. I would like to see a fiscal impact study before the second tranche is issued, and that should include looking at the impact on city services, looking at the impact on the budget for the school system, which has been touched on, looking at any issues around the bond rating. I know that there's been a workaround to deal with that, but making sure that that's intact, looking at transit, and the impact on the housing. We also believe there should be a lessons learned best practices. As we know from ABDI, from the other TIFs we've issued, we have had to have a deficiency 3 to 4 times. We'd like to make sure that this project is successful for everyone. So we'd like to see lessons learned about what's gone well in other TIF projects, where we've fallen short, and how we can build that in going forward into the Sagamore project after the first TIF is done. And most importantly, we'd like to make sure that there's a but-for analysis. That again was a recommendation from the Board of Finance's 2012 study. And we'd like to see the different scenarios, so if things do fall short, we can adjust mid-course and there can be mid-course corrections. We think that's really critical. This is a huge project. It's a huge opportunity. There are huge unintended consequences if it doesn't go well. And we want to ask the City Council to do their due diligence to include a but-for analysis before the second tranche is launched. And then two last pieces on accountability and fiscal responsibility. The first is just that the cost overrun should be paid by the developer. There should be some issue around the cost overruns. The city should not be responsible for it leveraging additional money after such a large amount of money is taken care of. There may be a way through the fiscal impact studies to address some of these things or get the financing right if there are some unintended consequences. But we think there needs to be ongoing management and monitoring and fiscal impact. And then finally, as Charlie mentioned, we also agree with the Comptroller's Office. The City Council should be looking, before each tranche is issued, have information on these reports, these quarterly reports on the economic projections and the fiscal projections, but also how well the metrics from the community benefits agreements in workforce and housing and others are being met. Because I think that's an important part of holding this project accountable and successful broadly. And that the tranche should be launched, or the tranche should be conditional on movement on all of these issues, not just on the fiscal, but also on the housing and the education and the workforce development. So conditioning that. And I think I will leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Libby Cohen from Build would echo the points around having the City Council approve each tranche of funding. And just a small addition to what MCRC laid out before the second tranche of funding were to be issued. We'd also like to see a market study. There's been extraordinary variation in the number of housing units that have been proposed for this development. We'd like to see a more robust market study looking at the actual demand for housing, so we know whether we should build 5,300 or 14,000 units.
I'm pretty sure that the council cannot approve each tranche.
That's done by Board of Finance.
Are we right?
You could amend the charter.
Okay.
We've been so successful at that so far. I think we're like 1 for 8.
Mr. Gaines.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and council members, members of the Comptroller's Office, BDC, and you know, Carl, we're getting old, or at least you are. I mean, when I look around all the people that we've been engaged with over the years, it's great. And sitting here listening to the Sagamore project, it is
Mr. Gaines,
yes, sir.
I said who you were, but you have to acknowledge yourself.
Michael Gaines, a consultant and real estate advisor. In sitting and listening to the various presentations, the Sagamore project is an awesome project, and I speak to that from my previous role as head of real estate for Department of General Services in the O'Malley administration, and looking at transformative projects like this, and can truly say that this project has all of the elements to transform a community, and not only community, but a city. And so from that perspective, do support all the things that they are doing. It represents a very complex project at many levels, which is why I also advocate for independent, third-party, independent compliance management and monitoring. No disrespect to my friends in the Comptroller's Office, but I can tell you about one project that we did at the state. We built a $200 million, obviously not as big as Port Covington, but we built a $200 million state-of-the-art public health lab. And we hired a third-party compliance manager to help us understand the project at every level. It was complex. We got monthly reports. We met and in some cases exceeded every one of our goals because we knew where the project was based on the plan that the developer and the contractor presented. And so I strongly advocate that the council put into the ordinance language that would provide for independent third-party compliance management with all of the elements that have been mentioned. In fact, it's good to see Sagamore agreeing to that as well. But I do think that a third party would bring the resources, both planning, technological innovations today to manage this complex project. thank you for the opportunity
Thank
to
you.
have input.
Before I go to Sagamore, the administration have anything to add or no? Any comments, questions from colleagues? No? Thank you. Sagamore.
So I feel like we're getting the band back together, right, Michael? So we too feel strongly that having an independent party monitor compliance. We do think that the comptroller's office is able to do that. If we need, we will have to supplement that, we know, at certain times, and we'll have people in our office. We may have to hire a consultant as well, and someone to communicate with the comptroller's office. So all of the things that we're talking about, looking at the real economic impact and the spin-off and what this project will contribute to the city over the years, we agree. The report to the council, and along with an audit on a regular basis, we agree. The monitoring MOUs and community benefits agreements, we wholeheartedly agree. There is not a bit of daylight between us on these issues. These are things that we recognize that there is, generally, I think, it almost doesn't matter what interest group, there is a trust deficit, and I'm not laying any blame at anyone's feet for that, but we can bring in people who will say, look, you know, you don't have to believe me. You'll have somebody that you can reach out to independently, get your own information. It's not coming through my filter. We agree with all of that wholeheartedly.
Okay, great, thank you. Any other? Thank you, everyone. We're going to recess until 4 p.m. next Tuesday, right back here. Thank you, it's been a great evening for all of us. Thanks. Thank you.